They suffered stab wounds in the attack and are now being looked after in hospital.
We need to make sure that when people carry out these activities, they feel the full force of the law. People think they can get away with this. The person who firebombed a few weeks ago is out on bail. That's not full force of the law.
This crisis, it's a crisis for all of us. It's not enough to simply say we stand with Jewish communities. Of course we do, but we must show it and act it. And the responsibility lies with each and every one of us, because it is our fight too.
Let's stop importing people from countries where anti-Semitism is the norm. And if our London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, in his infinite wisdom and belief in diversity, thinks that's the sort of diverse view that it's OK to have on the streets of London and the police don't get involved, don't be shocked, and don't you bloody dare claim to be shocked or upset or care about Jewish people being stabbed on the streets of our capital city in broad daylight. This is on you.
You keep getting proven right every single time. Jews are not safe in this country.
Well, absolutely. No one can be surprised or feeling shocked that this happened. No Jew certainly is. I mean, we had Zach Polanski last week saying this was just a perceived threat. Well, we can see this isn't any perception. This is real. This is happening on the streets. This isn't just an anti-Semitic terror attack. This is an attack on Britain, on the Western liberal democracy and values.
The first politician that uses the word shocking, I might just go and throttle him, because this is anything but shocking. It's the most expected thing is almost overdue, if you ask me, because I mean, I just left Israel last week. I thought it would be the last time we were woken up by explosions, but clearly not.
The Jewish community is our community, and their safety is our safety, and we have to make it absolutely clear.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello and a very good evening to you. This is the Evening Exchange with me, Charlie Rowley, sitting in for Peter Cardwell on what has been an absolute scorcher of a day. I hope you've been enjoying maybe a lager shandy, a white wine spritzer, a drink of your choice, soft or not, on what has been, I think, a record-breaking May Day, bank holiday summer, and let's hope that weather continues. I think it is going to into next week. And speaking of hot, we've got all the hot topics lined up for you this evening, starting with, I'm afraid, I'll have to get that drink ready, because that horrific case of those 3 teenage boys that were failed to be sent behind bars by Judge Nicholas Rowland. The Attorney General is now looking into that case. 3 boys that committed a vile rape against 2 teenage girls. They filmed it. They put it on social media, and they were just let off because they behaved well during a trial. It's absolute madness. The Prime Minister's appalled by it, he says, and Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary of the Prime Minister, says the Attorney General's looking into it. He's got 28 days to review that decision and hopefully come to the conclusion, which I think we all know would be the right one, which is that these boys should be behind bars. A lot of that, more to come. Labour still finding themselves infighting no end. Andy Burnham says that he'll look into the scrapping of jury trials. That's something that his colleague David Lammy, the Deputy Prime Minister, has already brought forward. Let's see whether that comes to fruition should Andy Burnham become the next Prime Minister and leader of the Labour Party. We've got Sadiq Khan also chipping in, criticising Sir Keir Starmer. There's far too many sirs going on in the Labour Party, if you ask me, saying that the message hasn't cut through enough, that Labour need to do better, and the Mayor of London seemingly now throwing his weight behind Andy Burnham. Is it a shoo-in for the Mayor of Manchester, from one mayor to another? Again, we'll be talking to Paul about that. Paul Richards, Labour commentator, former Labour advisor, and now commentator, all about that. And, of course, one topic that I know grinds everybody's gears, including mine, that the UK-EU advisory body has said that if the UK were to join the EU again, it would have to give up the pound. We'd be taking the euro. Not on my watch, friends. We've got that and a lot more to come, talking about the grooming gang scandal, talking about parents on benefits being paid to their teenagers. Their teenagers take part in apprenticeships. Our defence systems always seemingly depleted these days. Our RAF jet carrying our very own Defence Secretary, John Healey, was intercepted, frankly. The GPS systems were disabled during a 3-hour flight where our defence secretary was on board. Are the Russians now just playing games with us? Do they know that we are so weak that we can't even get the defence secretary home on autopilot? It's absolute madness. We'll be talking about all those stories with my brilliant debate panel coming up, and many more guests throughout the next 3 hours. So thank you for joining me, and joining me now to kick off this 3-hour extravaganza, as I said, former Labour advisor Paul Richards. Paul joins me now. Hello, Paul. Happy Bank Holiday Monday.
Hello. Thank you very much. Yes, it's been lovely, isn't it?
Have you been enjoying the sun?
I've been down to the seaside in Sussex, where I live. Absolutely rammed, I have to say. It was like I don't know what, sort of day out in the mall. But it was fabulous. And then sitting in the garden with friends and family talking about the Labour Party, obviously.
Well, you're absolutely right. Talking about the Labour Party, I mean, we've got we've had a nice day where people have had a lovely weekend where people can put their feet up, where they can relax, where they can talk politics if they want, but they might have wanted to talk about other things. But they've given themselves a bit of a respite because this week is going to be another big week. We say that every week, don't we, for the Labour Party, this Labour government. Over the weekend, Darren Jones, Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, made it clear that the Attorney General, Lord Hermer, was going to look into this horrific case of 3 boys that were failed to be thrown behind bars after horrific rape of 2 teenage girls. It brought Darren Jones to tears, I think, on the weekend. Shall we take a look at that clip now and just get your thoughts on the back of that?
As a minister, I'm not allowed to get ahead of the Attorney General's decision, but those girls deserve justice, as do their families, both for them, but also for other girls that are put in that position. And quite frankly, other boys need to know that they can't behave in that way and get away with it.
You are here as a minister, but I can actually tell from listening to you as a dad, I think you found that quite hard to watch and to listen to.
It was very hard to watch because no parent wants their daughter to be in those circumstances. And you don't want a society in which girls are growing up in those circumstances.
Well, a very emotional and human response, as you'd hope and expect from people in public life. But Paul, just take us through it. I mean, the Prime Minister has called the decision appalling, or he's been appalled by the case of those boys. Where does this now leave the Labour government? How quickly should they react? Do you think that there'll be a decision by the Attorney General within 28 days or sooner?
I mean, you saw Darren Jones's response there, which I think is the human response. He was on the verge of tears, as I think anyone who's looked into this case is similarly outraged and angered, not only by the evil act that was perpetrated and then filmed and spread around, but the fact that then the legal system seemed to just utterly let down the victim of this and to mete out a lenient sentence, which any reasonable person would say is an absolute disgrace. So we do luckily have this system whereby the Attorney General can look at the original judge's decision, that leniency, and as part of the review can actually come back with a much tougher sentence. The Prime Minister's made it clear. The Attorney General is Lord Hermer, who is, of course, Starmer's busy mate, and so you would think that there'd be a conversation perhaps behind the scenes there, not interfering with the proper legal process, but it would be known that the country would not stand for this and that the Attorney General needs to toughen up the sentence. And it needs to just be one of those things that sends a very clear signal out into the manosphere and beyond that this kind of violence towards women and girls is utterly, utterly repugnant and unacceptable. And the legal system will make it sure that we all understand that very clearly.
Well, you're absolutely right. There needs to be a very clear signal that goes to boys and men right across the country that these types of crimes, rape, sexual assault, is not acceptable. But he's given this judge, Nicholas Rowland, who has form on not sentencing or handing down sentences seemingly when they should be handed down. That judge has got form. I mean, it sent completely the wrong message, hasn't it? 3 teenage boys have committed a vile crime. As you say, it was filmed, a knife was involved, and the judge has basically said, well, I'm not going to put you behind bars because you might have had a bit of a low IQ. You might not have really understood what consent is, which I don't think you need any particularly high level of IQ to get that bit right. And because you demonstrated good behaviour during the trial, I'm going to let you off. That's just not right. That is completely the wrong message, isn't it?
It's totally the wrong message, and it's a good example where the legal profession seems to just not get it. It just seems to be out of kilter, out of step with where decency is in society, where the public is at. And this is not about, just wanting to drag out a terrible sentence as sort of terrible revenge. It's about the punishment fitting the crime. It's a terrible crime, and the punishment should be custodial and lengthy to reflect the terribleness of that particular crime. And the fact that, this was filmed for entertainment, and people seem to have a blurred line between reality and what happens on the social media. People's sense of reality is breaking down really as to what's real and what isn't, and this is just a good example of that. So the legal system does not always get it right, does it? I mean, and this is where politicians do have to step in and say, well, no, the public demands something much better from the legal system. Otherwise, people just get into the mindset that it's it's the blob, and it doesn't work, and that's when you get all kinds of other arguments around political oversight of the legal system, which constitutionally we've always tried to separate those things out. So I would say that it's dangerous for the legal system to be seen to be so utterly out of step with this kind of crime as well, and it speaks perhaps to the values of some of those senior judges, often men who really are not up to date in terms of where society's at and in terms of the power of social media, but also what is deemed acceptable in the modern age. But when there was, I don't believe there was ever a moment where rape was in any way acceptable anywhere in our society. So it's not like it's a nuanced debate. Rape is always an evil, always wrong. And the legal system should always reflect that with tough sentences.
You're absolutely right. And look, I mean, I wanted to ask you about the judge, actually, because I remember a story not so long ago, I think it was in relation to Brexit, where the Daily Mail ran a front page and they showed the pictures of, I think, a series of judges, and the headline was "Enemies of the People," I think it was, or "Enemies of the State," which at the time I thought, my gosh, you can't be putting up the pictures or, particularly targeting those judges. They're just doing their job. They're highly trained people. They just want justice. They want the best outcomes like everybody else, and they are the most qualified people to be making those kinds of decisions. I had huge respect and still do for judges and the judicial process, but this case has completely changed my view, of certain judges. You could argue, and some people have done, that there are some activist judges, people that may be too liberal, too left-leaning, that just think, oh, actually, these boys, they are able to be rehabilitated. That's why we should just give them a rehabilitation order, as opposed to time behind bars. Is it not right, actually, that we now shine a light on some of these judges that might be activist judges, or certainly when they get decisions wrong, the public, the media, and government, as you rightly alluded to a second ago, should be calling them out for it?
Well, I think that's the role of the government, is to set the framework for the legal profession and to have some minimum standards, minimum sentencing, that sort of thing, where there is clear direction. I mean, if you talk to a magistrate, for example, they will say their hands are pretty much tied as to what they can and can't do. And that's the sort of the democratic input into this, in terms of what society says is a serious crime and what isn't, and what the punishments for those crimes should be. I mean, to speak up in favour of the system just briefly, and momentarily, the fact that there is an appeal system, the fact that it can go to the Attorney General, and let's hope, fingers crossed, that the Attorney General then comes back and says, look, that was a ludicrous decision. These men need a much tougher penalty for their terrible crime. That might be a glimmer that actually the system does work. I mean, it should be working first time, but at least there is a system of appeal and sort of second go at it to get it right the second time. So let's see what comes out. He's got 28 days, as you say, Charlie. So, and the clock is ticking. And the public, I think, are furious. Darren Jones, I think, spoke for millions of dads out there just appalled at what had happened, and you can see the tears in his eyes. He was choking back a tear there, which you don't always get from our politicians. And I think, for him, he obviously went off script. He wasn't just sort of trotting out the government lines of the day. He obviously was speaking as a human being and a dad, which is quite nice to see our politicians do from time to time. But I think the fact that he spoke like that shows that that's where the public is at, and I think that's what the appeal process now and Lord Hermer's process is going to have to take into account.
Well, absolutely. And I think, look, the phones will be ringing off the hook, I think, with this story, because there'll be so many people incensed by it. If you do want to get involved in this conversation, it's 0344 499 1000. That's 0344 499 1000, or text the word talk to 87222, and you can leave a voice note, send a text, and get in touch, and we'll get all your calls and messages, as many as possible, online. But Paul, it leads me on, as you say, that where there could be an appeals process, or there has been in this case, there is no faith, I would argue, in Labour's plans, because David Lammy announced not so long ago to scrap jury trials. Andy Burnham, a candidate for Makerfield by-election, the man that could go on. Everybody is expecting him, if he does win that by-election, and we can't talk too much about the by-election per se, but if he were to win, he could be the next leader of the Labour Party. He could be the next Prime Minister of this country. And he has hinted today in the Telegraph that he would do a U-turn, another one, of this Labour government on David Lammy's jury trial reforms. Who do you support more in this? Do you support David Lammy or Andy Burnham?
I would just push back on your choice of words there, Charlie, because you said the Labour government is scrapping jury trials. I mean, not all of them. What it's saying is there are certain trials in certain circumstances, for example, extremely complex, long time taking fraud trials, where a panel of judges would probably do a quicker, better job and get to the justice.
But that's the problem. But hold on, but that's the problem, because the case that we were just talking about was a serious and complex case. The jury, made up of ordinary working people, I would argue, found these teenage boys, guilty, but yet it was the judge who hasn't given them the time that they deserve.
But that's why the process is in place we described, where that can be toughened up. But I think the point about the jury trials, not all of them have to be jury trials to speed things up and to unblock the legal system is a good one, because if you're going back to rape cases, for example, women who've been raped are often dropping out of the legal process because it takes so long, and so it can take months and months and months, years sometimes, for justice to be even started in terms of the court process. And if you can somehow free the backlog and the log jam and scrapping some jury trials in some circumstances, this is what David Lammy is arguing, means that you do get to justice faster. Now, people say, the right to be tried by your peers is in Magna Carta, which of course it is enshrined there, and that's why we're not scrapping jury trials. But the other thing in Magna Carta is that justice delayed is justice denied. And that's a very important legal principle back from 1215 also. And I think if you are having to wait a year or two to get to courts before you even get into the process of justice being done, that is denying justice to folks. So that's where Lammy is coming from. He's not trying to undermine our ancient liberties. He's basically saying, let's make this screwy system work a bit more efficiently, so that people can actually get the justice done. Because can you imagine the frustration of somebody who has been the victim of a terrible crime and then simply gives up, thinks the system isn't going to work. There's no point waiting around. I'd rather be free from all this angst, and just means that the perpetrators get away with it. And that's where the system really starts to fail people.
Well, one system that seemingly failed people, which is why people almost 10 years ago voted to leave the EU, was because they didn't think that the government was focused on communities that had been overlooked. Too much money was going to Brussels. And there seems to be this obsession within the Labour Party. The two leading candidates, you would have thought, although we don't know how many people might come forward, should there be a Labour leadership election, but Wes Streeting and Andy Burnham both said that they'd like to see the UK back into the EU. Now, this is an organisation where we'd end up having to pay more, where today the UK-EU parliamentary group leaders from the EU side of things have said that if we wanted to do that, we'd have to join the euro, we'd have to give up our great British pound. After such a thumping defeat at the local elections in places that voted for Brexit, where people are leaving the Labour Party because they want to see the UK have its control over its laws, its money, its borders, not have its not be dictated to, I should say, by the EU. Why is the Labour Party unable just to see that? And why does it want to, in the words of David Cameron, former Conservative leader, why does it feel it needs to keep banging on about Europe?
Well, the whole country is banging on about Europe all the time. It's not like it's a settled question, and that we are debating the pros and cons of Brexit and how it should have been done or not done or done differently for the last 10 years. It has dominated our public life, hasn't it? For the last 10 years, it's also dominated people's wallets, because we're all a little bit poorer as a result of Brexit. But we're not going to relitigate the referendum, and there's certainly no suggestion that any Labour government is going to take Britain back into the EU. And when you've heard the politicians talking about...
Well, that's what Andy Burnham said he'd like to do. And Wes Streeting. He wants to rejoin the EU in his lifetime. That's what he said.
Well, I think I was there in the room when Wes spoke, certainly at the Progress conference a Saturday or so ago, and he was asked the question, do you think we'd be better off than Europe or not? And he said, obviously, as a Remainer, and I am as well. I voted to remain in the EU 10 years ago. Obviously, our choice was to stay in, and we feel it would have been better had we done that. Now, we haven't done that, and we're out of Europe, and no one's saying, well, let's open those wounds and have another Brexit debate about an actual, re-entry into the EU on those terms. Also, of course, as you say in your intro there, Charlie, Europe doesn't particularly want us because they would, it would be a terrible green light to other countries who might want to exit and then might have the choice to come back on good terms. They're not going to make it easy if we ever got anywhere near those kinds of negotiations. That's not to say, though, we shouldn't trade with Europe, and it'd be stupid to cut our nose off to spite our face when there is a trade opportunity where British businesses and jobs could benefit from more frictionless trade with Europe. That's not giving up sovereignty. That's making us more prosperous, and that's just, any business person would tell you the best market is the one that's the nearest. So there's no problem with any of that, and that's what Labour's doing when it talks about getting closer to the markets across the channel. But no, we're not going back into the EU, regardless of what politicians' personal views may or may not be.
Well, we're delighted to have you, Paul. As you say, you're someone that's in the room. Let's hypothesise then on the future of the Labour Party, because, that's what everybody's doing, let's be honest, and that's what's going to happen for the next few weeks, so long as the by-election goes on. Let's suppose Andy Burnham does become an MP, whether it's through this by-election or any other means. What happens to Sir Keir Starmer? Or let's say, even if Andy Burnham doesn't become an MP, what happens to the Labour Party leadership in the next few weeks?
I mean, it is endlessly fascinating to try and work out the permutations of this, because we're all in uncharted waters now. And should there be a challenge to the Prime Minister, that means an MP, whoever that might be, getting 81 names of their parliamentary colleagues on an official, register to sort of put forward a leadership bid. Starmer, of course, could stand in that leadership contest. So the first scenario is that, Keir Starmer is challenged by somebody or maybe more than one, and fights it in the way that, for example, John Major did back in the mid-90s when he said put up or shut up. Or within the Labour Party, Neil Kinnock did it when Tony Benn tried to depose him in 1988 and he won 9-1. So, so there's that scenario. Or Starmer says, well, OK, I've had enough, I'm off, and there's no indication of that whatsoever, which means you get a much more open contest. So then you get more 4 or 5. If there are, how many Labour MPs are there? 400. So it's 400 divided by 81. You might get 4 candidates who can game it and get 81 or more candidates might come forward. So you might get that scenario. So a big open contest with your Yvette Coopers and maybe somebody from the hard left and maybe somebody from the soft left and somebody from the mainstream and the centre, so you could have a sort of ideological spread there of different candidates. Oh, goodness me. Or you might just get a coronation. You might just somebody might arrive in Parliament, and we can't name any names for the reasons you've described, but somebody might just appear in Parliament as a new MP, and everyone says, well, let's back this guy, and the guy in charge says, OK, fair dues, or maybe this is what I wanted all along. Coronation, enough MPs nominate said anonymous figure, and he gets so many nominations that no other candidate can stand. And that's what Gordon Brown did when he took over from Tony Blair. He got so many nominations, no one else could get a look in, a coronation, no election, and then he's the Prime Minister, whoever this person, he or she may be. So honestly, it's like three-dimensional chess, and this is what I've been speaking about all day long on the beach. What if? We just don't know. But I suppose the bottom line is to remember there is not actually at the moment a Labour leadership contest. No candidate has put themselves forward. Nobody, not even Wes Streeting, has 81 names out there as their official backers. So we're not actually any further than we were 3 weeks ago when we kicked off this whole discussion. No. Anything can happen.
But you sound, I mean, people should know, I consider you a friend, Paul, behind the scenes. I know we're on complete opposite sides of the political spectrum, but we get on, I like to think. We're quite pally in the green rooms of other media outlets. But you sound exasperated, I have to say. And, as someone who I think cares about politics, obviously, and cares about, the direction of the Labour Party as you do, surely this must be a huge frustration that it's just sucking up all the airtime, all the publicity of what a Labour government could be doing, and yet it's like, rats in a sack when it comes to the leadership of the Labour Party.
I'm extremely angry at the whole scenario. I do feel the need to apologise to the British public whenever I get the chance to be in front of a camera, because I think it's enormously unedifying. I mean, it's not just bad for the Labour Party, as you say, about which I care, but I care about my country far more. And I feel that, we need good governance and governments getting on with it, fulfilling their mandates, whether we personally like them or not. That's the democratic system that we value so strongly. And I've always said a kind of internecine, internal, drawn-out contest where candidates are knocking lumps out of each other and not really talking to the public. And I said at the time that if you think the proper reaction to getting a thumping in the county council elections and in Scotland and Wales is to have a Labour Party leadership contest where we just talk to ourselves and row in public for 3 months, you're nuts. I mean, that is absolutely not what the public was saying. They were saying, fix things, get on with it, stop mucking about, do the things we care about, whether it's small boats or potholes and all points in between. But an internal contest is the last thing we needed, really. But we are where we are. And like I say, there isn't one, but this conversation is going to carry on until something gives. And, I'm not Mystic Paul. I just don't know what that thing is going to be, because there are so many moving parts and possible permutations. And, I'll tell you one thing, though, Charlie. The Labour Party is very good at throwing up the result that you don't expect. So all the people cleverly gaming it, we ended up with Ed Miliband instead of David Miliband. We ended up with Jeremy Corbyn as leader, for heaven's sake, which nobody could have properly predicted on an electoral system that allowed people who were not Labour Party members to vote, including some Conservatives. And so, the Labour Party is very good at doing the thing you least expect. And all of us soothsayers gathering around, confidently predicting what will happen, usually end up with egg on our faces. So who knows really what's going to happen over the next 3 months, but it just needs sorting. And like I say, sorry to the public, but we just need to then get back on track and start governing again.
Well, there you are, Paul. Thank you so much for your time. Paul Richards, very candid there, and an apology to the nation if any more politicians were like Paul. Thank you so much, Paul. After the break, we've got my debate desk with the brilliant Viggo Turling and Benjamin Butterworth. They'll be here next. This is the home of common sense. This is the Evening Exchange. This is Talk.
Current affairs, international news, letting criminals off while sending... Oi! Oi! You shut up! I'm trying to record something.
Stand by for 3 powerhouse hours of breaking news, challenging views. I don't give a flying damn about international law. I think people will viscerally reject this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and very good evening. It is still evening, isn't it? This is the Evening Exchange with me, Charlie Rowley, sitting in for Peter Cardwell, who I've no doubt is sunning himself somewhere, enjoying the last of this bank holiday Monday with, well, he won't have a beer in hand, will he? But, you know, a nice shandy or a white wine spritzer. I'll give it, or an appetiser, you're absolutely right. James, producer there, feeding me all the soft drinks, something which I know very little about. Get in touch, 0344 499 1000, that's the number. You can send a voice note and call up, and we'll get as many calls as we can live on this Evening Exchange. You can text the word TALK to 87222, or on social media via X, just text the word @talktv with your message, and as I say, we'll endeavour to get as many as we can on air. But on the air now, joining me in the studio on this scorch of a bank holiday Monday, I'm delighted to say we've got Viggo Turling, research associate from the Adam Smith Institute, and, well, someone else has joined the studio. It is, of course, a friend of mine, Labour. Are you a Labour agitator? Can I say that? Or
I've never been called it before.
it's an exclusive
I'm
here.
the best guest in your price range.
On the Institute. He'll do anything for a fiver. Of course, it's Benjamin Butterworth, a good friend of mine, journalist and political commentator. Welcome both. Thank you very much for joining me on this Bank Holiday Monday. Let's just start with that story that we're talking about at the top of the show. This horrific case of those three boys that have not received jail time. This is a judge, Nicholas Rowley, who basically, after hearing all the details of the case, where a knife was involved, where it was filmed, where attacks took place on two girls, 14 and 15, in one attack, and then a third girl, I think, separately in January of 2025. The judge has decided that these boys, they demonstrated good behaviour during the trial. They've got low IQ. Therefore, we just have to give them a rehabilitation order. What message does that send to... I mean, you're both two young men. What does that send to boys, particularly young boys, across the country? I'll start with you, Vicky.
I don't think it sends the right message, Charlie. I think what we've seen here, and obviously we know Lord Herman's going to look into this case, and all resentencing should be independent of government pressure, of media pressure. But what we've seen here is a juvenile discount applied to a sentencing that has shown that really, I think, as we all agree, justice hasn't been served in this case, and I think we need to be hard on this, what was a horrible case, and show that this isn't acceptable in our society, what these boys did on multiple occasions.
I suppose the premise from where softer sentences or different sentences happen is because juveniles are not tried in an adult court. They would usually go to a youth rehabilitation centre, which I think is one of the consequences the judge handed out in this case. And you don't want to, sometimes the argument is that you don't want to send a teenager down the path of criminalisation by surrounding them with hardened, experienced adult criminals. Now, if the case...
But these boys should be in jail,
Of course.
Yeah.
So that what I'm saying is, if this were a theft or something, then maybe it would be right to treat a 15-year-old differently and not, make all their friends be hardened criminals who are 40-year-olds. But in this case, you've got a situation where it was not the first attack of this nature. It involved a knife, and they filmed it. And I think the filming it is particularly significant, because what that means is that putting it online could lead to humiliation for the victim forever, because you can't delete things from the internet once people start sharing it and ends up on God knows what websites. And so this was clearly a meditated attack. Now, the judge said that he doesn't, quote-unquote, want to unnecessarily criminalise a child. Well, I could think of few things more necessary as a criminal offence that should result in custodial sentencing than a meditated rape of this nature. It's utterly horrific. And what message does it send to the other boys? I mean, I think the girl in this case said, "Why did I put myself through the pain of going to court?" Now, there will be other teenage girls and women out there who have been subjected to rapes by other teenage boys and men, and they'll be looking at this case and they'll be expecting that decision to be changed if they're going to come forward and get justice against other attackers.
You're absolutely right, and one of the victims was on the Sunday political programme sessions yesterday. He said the decision was like a rock straight in my face. I mean, these are the victims. I'm afraid it's not these boys. But yet the judge seemingly has being too lenient, I think many people would argue, and you've got the whole political classes coming out to sort of criticise the judge. You've got Lord Herman, as you said, Vigo, sort of looking into it. I mean, what can the Labour government do to restore, I think, probably trust in the justice system? Bearing in mind they've got rid of some jury trials. I mean, it doesn't bode well, does it? For without those jury trials, the whole point of why they said that they would do that is because it allows the experts, the judges, to make those decisions. Well, this judge has made this decision, seemingly handing down a not fit for purpose sentence compared to when a jury found in favour of conviction. I mean, it's beggars belief, isn't it?
It does. And look, I completely understand, and you laid it out really clearly, Ben. I completely understand why we have juvenile discounts in certain cases. However, what I think the Labour government should be very clear with is we need to be careful about what precedents some of these cases set. And we've covered this very clearly. This is a harrowing case, and these boys, in I think everyone's opinion, have been dealt with too leniently. And I originally come from Sweden, and we had a big issue there with juvenile discounts being applied to many cases, and that led to gang crime, or gangs exploiting those juvenile discounts so young people enlisted by them could get away with more. So I think we need to be very careful with the precedents our legal system sets, especially in the system we have in this country with judicial review, etc.
I mean, let's talk about jury. Did you want to come back on to the jury?
No, just saying that's very interesting. I mean, you wonder with county lines, which has grown as a problem in recent years, so that's where drug gangs get children to deliver drugs to countryside areas outside of major cities, which has become a much bigger problem in recent years, whether they exploit things like juvenile discounts, because, you know, the 14-year-old that they capture into their ring can go and do things with less of a consequence than if they get the 18-year-old to do it.
I mean, just on the jury trial stuff, though, because, you know, Andy Burnham, who everyone expects, if he gets into Parliament, to go on to become the next Prime Minister. He said that he was indicated that he would reverse, so another Labour U-turn on the cards, they're all racking up, he would reverse David Lammy's decision to alter the way in which the jury system works in this country. Who do you agree with, David Lammy or Andy Burnham?
I mean, there is an enormous backlog at the moment in the court system for serious offences, and so I can see the logic that, you know, justice delayed is justice denied, and there will of course be cases where the victims back out, they drop out of pursuing the case because the idea that it takes 5 years when it ought to have taken 2 years means that they don't go for it. I think it's, you know, the principle of a jury trial is pretty fundamental to a democratic society and a sense of justice that's prevailing. Now, of course, there are loads of cases that don't have juries already. It's not setting a precedent, but I think you have to be extremely careful with that. I'd also just say on this that I think Lord Herman was the one that raised it, that this should be reviewed. It's why it came into public sphere. But there's a very real question for the government, which is that because of the lack of prison places, I very much suspect that judges have been told to be sparing with custodial sentences. And so does the government have a question to answer with that being part of the thinking process for this judge?
I mean, another thing that people get up in arms about this government is the idea that it wants to rejoin the EU. And the UK-EU parliamentary group from the Brussels side said that if we are to rejoin, which is what West Reading wants, which is what Andy Burnham has said he wanted, where you have Rachel Reeves and the Prime Minister say they want ever closer ties with the EU, if that's going to happen, we're going to have to give up the Great British Pound. I'm still looking at you, Benjamin. I'll come to you in a second, Vigo, because you travel a lot, don't you, Benjamin? You've got all kinds of currency in your wallet, I mean, in your back pocket.
No pounds.
But no pounds. Would you like to get rid of the pound?
No, and you know, it was a Labour government that stopped that happening when it was most likely. But I do think that the barriers we have to trade are not helping anybody, and there might be a few more pounds swilling around if we joined Europe.
Vigo, I mean, it makes no sense, does it? Why on earth would we give up the Great British Pound? We're not part of the EU anymore. Why on earth would we have worse terms if we were to ever rejoin, which we shouldn't do? And then that's coming from someone that voted Remain in the first place. I don't want to go back into a club that we'd have worse rules, or where we'd be having to follow more rules, more regulations. It would cost us a hell of a lot more than what it did in the first time round, and we wouldn't have our own currency.
Yeah, look, I completely agree. I certainly don't think we should give up the Great British Pound. I certainly don't think we should join the Eurozone. I think that would be a disaster for this country. But on the question of the EU-UK reset, I do think Brexit was botched. While I saw much value in Brexit and leaving the European Union, I think aligning ourselves closer in some respects, after all, the EU is upwards of 40% of all our trade, is good for us. But we obviously need to be considerate in our approach towards that question.
There you go. Protect our pound. We've got loads of calls and texts coming in on this, which we'll get to after this break. But get in touch, 0344 499 1000. What do you think about the sentencing that wasn't passed by a judge when it came to those three rapists, teenage rapists? They should be behind bars. Let us know what you think about that. And do you think that the pound is at risk? 0344 499 1000. This is the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good evening. This is the Evening Exchange with me, Charlie Rowley, sitting in for Peter Cardwell. And we still have my two fantastic guests, Viggo Turling, the Research Associate at the Adam Smith Institute, and he's here too. Back again. We couldn't get rid of you over the weekend. Benjamin Butterworth, political commentator and journalist. Delighted to have you both. Thank you so much for giving up your Bank Holiday Monday to be with us today. All your calls and texts are coming in. I promise you we will get to them very soon. We've talked about a couple of domestic issues, whether it's the UK rejoining the EU or whether it's about our criminal justice system. More broadly, internationally, making the headlines today as well, Iran. Donald Trump's trying to do a deal, I'm told. It's all going incredibly well, isn't it?
Not quite, Charlie. I wouldn't quite describe the situation as that. Look, I find this whole situation completely ridiculous because Trump's clearly looking for a way out of the Iran situation and he's not finding one. And the idea that they're about to sign a deal in which Iran agrees to not further enrich its uranium stock, I find highly unlikely because look at it from a strategic perspective. Why would the Iranian state go down that route? Why is it that Trump hasn't attacked North Korea, for example? It's because they have nuclear weapons and they could retaliate against American allies, South Korea, Japan, etc. If the Iranians obtain nuclear weapons, suddenly their situation is the same as the North Koreans and suddenly they cannot be attacked again. So what the president has outlined is that they might reach a deal now and then in 60 days they'll renegotiate again for the nuclear weapons. We'll see what happens, but I'm highly sceptical that any deal will be reached on that front.
But you're a fan of Donald Trump, aren't you?
No. Please, of all the things you've said to me, that's the worst. You know, I had to laugh. He said there won't be I don't do bad deals, and so there won't be a quick deal with Iran. And you can't help but think, well, I noticed it wasn't a quick deal. We're several months into this crisis. Now, I'm interested by this idea of talking about, well, we can't let them develop uranium and get nuclear weapons. Well, I was in Israel last June when war with Iran was declared, the 12-day war, and they said that was to take out Iran's nuclear capabilities, and at the end of the 12 days they said they had been very successful in doing so. The 5 days I spent in a bomb shelter under missile fire from Iranian missiles in Tel Aviv was pretty terrifying, along with every other Israeli. And so I can't help but wonder if they're raising that as one of the points today. Were they being dishonest then, or were they being dishonest now? It does give some reflection of the, Tony Blair weapons of mass destruction line that just kept being used. And the other thing I'd say is that, I agreed with trying to take out the regime because the Ayatollah and the IRGC are a threat to world stability and they're a terrorist regime. But they haven't taken them out, and they have cost us a fortune.
Well, that was going to be my question, Nice. But so you think it was the right thing to do for Trump to go in to attack Iran in the way that he did? Should the UK presumably then, if you thought it was the right thing to do, the UK should have been a bit more upfront and helped?
Well, I have to say, I think I changed. I mean, that's what I thought at the time, but I was wrong, and it's not often, Charlie, that you'll hear me say that. But
can we clip that up, please? That will go far and wide. I think Benjamin Butterworth has just accepted that he was wrong.
I was wrong. And the problem is that the principle was right, to try and take out the regime so that you don't have this terrorist threat, so that it's not abusing and slaughtering its own Iranian people in the tens of thousands. But there wasn't a strategy. And the reality that you can't escape months and months in is that a regime as monstrous and as relatively poor as Iran's seems to have the world's most powerful nation over an oil barrel in the Strait of Hormuz. They have so much power, and Donald Trump needs an off-ramp.
Now, it won't be lost on people, Viggo, that you are slightly younger than both Benjamin and, well, significantly more younger than Benjamin and just a little bit younger than me. Lots of people, when we talk about the Iran war and the people that supported it, as I did, for the reasons that Benjamin actually set out, I think, it's a tyrannical regime. It funds proxies like the Hezbollahs, the Houthis, the Hamas. It's all people that want to do us all ill, whether it's in the UK or just in the Western world more broadly. But a lot of the pushback that I had would be like, well, hold on, okay, you're 36, but would you actually want to then commit young people, young men and women, maybe of your age? I mean, you're how old? 19. So, would you commit young people like yourself to go and fight in those wars? A lot of people said, no, thank you very much. It's not our war to be fighting. And people in America will be saying, it's not, my son or daughter's war to be fighting. I mean, what's your take on the whole thing?
I think that's an interesting question. I think it complicates itself on Iran, specifically because it's not our war. I think if the question were reversed or were changed slightly, and you asked me if Putin were to go into Estonia tomorrow, would we defend our NATO allies as we're supposed to do under Article 5 and send our troops into that war? And I'd certainly agree. But specifically because Iran isn't our war and US Central Command have seemingly planned it strategically so poorly, I actually think Keir Starmer made the right call in not joining that war and not sending British servicemen to potentially die in it.
And I do think that, especially given we don't have much cash going spare in this country, if you're asking serious questions of the US administration and they don't have answers, which it would appear has been the case several months in, then, should we be held responsible for that mistake when it's the US that had failed to prepare, failed to have a strategy? And they've spent billions in a single day at times.
But did we not just fail to step up and help with all of that strategy? I mean, we could have, if we were shoulder to shoulder with the US on this particular issue going into Iran, and a regime that you said, Benjamin, has turned its guns on its own people, that it does no one any favours for it to be in existence. We could have been side by side with the US and said, well, hang on, Donald, I think, great, you've got the military might, but hold on, have you thought about this, this ABC, XYZ? We can help with that, with the planning, with the strategy, with the operational getting in and getting out, the aftermath of planning. But we just sort of sat back and said, no, it's yours, you carry on, nothing to see here, we can't fund our own defences, therefore we may as well not bother. That was the wrong approach, wasn't it?
I think all indications are that the US didn't ask for our help, didn't give us that insight and intelligence in advance. Indeed, it didn't to other countries. It made it slightly on a whim at the request of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. If the question is, should we be stricter on Iran and its regime? Well, yeah, we've been woefully, dangerously, grotesquely weak against that. I've done investigations as a journalist before where I've been told of people that live in London, always Iranian diaspora or Jews that live here, who have had their lives threatened, had assassination attempts, abductions. whose parents who live in Iran have been waterboarded in one case, and the authorities here have not pursued a prosecution. They've tried to protect those individuals with intelligence and officers, but they haven't gone after the regime. There was an Iranian news channel based in West London, in Chiswick, where there were people observing it plotting a terrorist threat against there, and journalists had to leave Britain because they could not do their job due to agents in this country of the Iranian regime. We have been woefully weak for years. Sadly, Donald Trump hasn't managed to fix it either.
But that surely then poses the question, why haven't we been prepared? You know, we should have stumped up more cash for our defences, surely. Be good.
Yeah, on the question of our defence preparedness, absolutely. You know, we've been waiting on the defence investment plan for how many months now? So absolutely. On the question of preparedness, we are certainly falling behind our allies and our enemies, more importantly. But on Iran, again, what Trump and I think the Israelis and the American military didn't quite grasp is that this is a state who had 50 years to prepare to defend itself. All Iran needs to do is survive, and now they've discovered they have a choke point, which is the Strait of Hormuz, that they can use to basically strangle the entire global economy and hold the global economy hostage, and they're not going to let go of that anytime soon, I think.
Very quickly before we go to the break, on the back of the intervention from the US in Iran, are we in a more safer world or not?
Well, absolutely not. I don't think so, and that's specifically because we've seen how fragile the global economy is to that chokehold. That chokehold has cost the United States $270 billion so far. The highest estimates suggest, and the world economy even more. So, no, I do not think we're safer.
We're not. And actually, if you're China looking at Taiwan right now, you'd think, I think the US isn't nearly as strong as it claims to be. And that is a much more, well, another significant risk.
And it's going to run and run, isn't it? It's not coming to an end anytime soon. No. Shaking heads in the for our listeners on radio. We're all in agreement that I think this will go on a bit longer than anticipated. We'll go to a short break in a second, but just some breaking news coming from The Telegraph. Labour MPs are preparing to defect to the Green Party if Andy Burnham loses the Makerfield by-election. The Telegraph understands that backbench Labour MPs approached the Green Party several months ago to discuss joining, but talks are on hold until the outcome of the by-election, which is taking place on the 18th of June. Potential defectors who are on the left of the Labour Party believe that if Burnham wins and becomes PM, Labour will pursue a more left-wing agenda that better aligns with their views. So more Labour MPs who feel as though if Andy Burnham loses the by-election, that they won't have a leader of the Labour Party that represents them, that they'll have no other choice but to defect to the Greens. Exciting stuff. Let me know what your thoughts about that. 0344 499 1000. This is the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Current affairs, international news, letting criminals off while sending... Oi! Oi! You shut up! I'm trying to record something.
Stand by for 3 powerhouse hours of breaking news, challenging views. I don't give a flying damn about international law. I think people will viscerally reject this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, very good evening and welcome to the Evening Exchange with me, Charlie Rowley, in for Peter Cardwell. Let's just read a couple of your messages. Charlie, the 3 boy monsters should be castrated for a start. Serious deterrents are needed to prevent a descent into chaos. That's from Mal in Eastbourne. That's in relation to the 3 young boys, 14, 15, that were not given jail sentences, something that's now under review by the Attorney General. Let's hope he comes to the right decision. This is from Richard in Leicester. Do you honestly think Labour are bothered about rapes and murders? Have you forgot that letting them into the country, never mind the murders and rapists we already have in the country, we are a failed state? Well, Richard, happy Bank Holiday Monday to you. But I think that sentiment is something that we shared quite widely. Have we got a grip on people coming into this country, foreign criminals that do go on to commit those vile crimes that we don't seem to be able to deport? Does this country have a grip of what's going on? A lot of people would think not. We've only got 5 minutes to go. I'll read out many, many more messages and take some of your calls in the next 2 hours, but I'm still delighted to be joined by Vigo and Benjamin here. Last couple of stories that have been making the papers today. Angela Rayner tells Starmer to ban social media for under 16s. Now, this is something that he sort of thought about doing, then it sort of got dropped, and now it looks as though he's under pressure to do it again. I mean, how many U-turns is that on one policy?
Yeah.
Vigo, you're 19.
Indeed.
What's your thoughts?
I'm deeply conflicted by this particular question because, and I'm sorry to say, my sort of conservative outlook on things suggests that the state should jump in to safeguard children from the dangers of social media, because being as young as I am, I see how addictive these platforms are. I see how they are designed to increase the number of clicks, to increase the number of minutes that you spend on a screen. However, I just simply do not trust the British state to enforce a ban on social media properly. We're just seeing some research coming from Australia now where this ban has been enforced, and that research tells us that upwards of 60% of 12 to 15-year-olds are avoiding the ban. In Australia, and I think that just goes to show that perhaps a ban is not the way to go, and maybe just deeper regulation is.
Well, I'm interested because you're 19, and I don't meet many 19-year-olds.
And you're far cry from 19, but let's be honest, come on, it's been a while.
Indeed. So, when you were at school, because actually you have gone to school a generation that neither Charlie or I suspect most listeners know what it's like to grow up with social media. How much of a problem is it? Like, how much cyberbullying, how much pressure, how much sort of photoshopping of things and unrealistic lives, seeing what everyone else is doing at the weekend? Like, what environment is it like to be a teenager on social media today?
I have to be honest, I personally, that whole debate around cyberbullying and the cyber world and the mental health implications of that was not a big presence in my sort of adolescence. I have to be honest. I didn't experience negative implications from it that significantly, and neither did, I'd say, most of the people I know who were close to me. However, just on the question of social media addiction and what I think it's doing to sort of our brain chemistry and the ways we interact with our world and our attention spans and all that, I just think it's hugely damaging. Seeing my friends, my acquaintances just zombified by their screens and the apps they're using, it's quite worrying. And let me just say, I don't think it just applies to adolescents. I think it applies to everyone, everyone in our society today.
Yeah. What about a social media ban for over 60s as well?
Which is your category, obviously. The category you're in. But there's a fundamental question, Benjamin, because look, this government also wants to allow people at 16 and 17 to vote. But yet they want to ban people at the age of 16 to then not be on social media. You can't have it both ways by saying, young people are able enough to vote in the democratic sort of, constitution of our country, to vote for the next government that's going to make huge decisions on all of our lives. But yet they can't be trusted to, control their own Facebook or Instagram or whatever.
But there are lots of ills that we don't think it's wise to give to a 16-year-old. Indeed, lots of ills we make it illegal for adults to have. And Vigo's right that I think social media addiction and distortion affects all of us. whether we admit it or not. But it's particularly dangerous, I think, for young developing minds, and there's increasing medical and scientific evidence on this, that it starts to distort the pathways in the brain by spending all of your time looking at your phone, looking at social media, and so they're not engaging with school in the way that they should. It's damaging their self of sense because you see completely unrealistic ideas of the world, ideas that you can't meet, which must be particularly threatening as a young person. And then also, you know, the ability to be a victim of abuse and of bullying, and particularly, we talked about rapes earlier, but sexual abuse online makes it a lot easier because teenagers might exchange photos that are inappropriate, and they end up getting shared widely, and it can cause very serious problems. These are all realities that I think a government needs to be far more mature and recognise.
No, you're absolutely right, boys. We've got to leave it there. Thank you so much to my debate panel this evening, Benjamin Butterworth and Viggo Turling. That's how I pronounce it. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay tuned. This is the Evening Exchange. This is Charlie Rowley. This is...
At 11:16 this morning, two men, aged 76 and 34, were attacked on Highfield Avenue in Barnet. They suffered stab wounds in the attack and are now being looked after in hospital.
We need to make sure that when people carry out these activities, they feel the full force of the law. People think they can get away with this. The person who firebombed a few weeks ago is out on bail. That's not full force of the law.
This crisis, it's a crisis for all of us. It's not enough to simply say we stand with Jewish communities. Of course we do, but we must show it and act it. And the responsibility lies with each and every one of us, because it is our fight too.
Let's stop importing people from countries where anti-Semitism is the norm. And if our London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, in his infinite wisdom and belief in diversity, thinks that's the sort of diverse view that it's OK to have on the streets of London and the police don't get involved, don't be shocked, and don't you bloody dare claim to be shocked or upset or care about Jewish people being stabbed on the streets of our capital city in broad daylight. This is on you.
You keep getting proven right every single time. Jews are not safe in this country.
Well, absolutely. No one can be surprised or feeling shocked that this happened. No Jew certainly is. I mean, we had Zach Polanski last week saying this was just a perceived threat. Well, we can see this isn't any perception. This is real. This is happening on the streets. This isn't just an anti-Semitic terror attack. This is an attack on Britain, on the Western liberal democracy and values.
The first politician that uses the word shocking, I might just go and throttle him, because this is anything but shocking. It's the most expected thing is almost overdue, if you ask me, because, I mean, I just left Israel last week. I thought it would be the last time we were woken up by explosions, but clearly not.
The Jewish community is our community, and their safety is our safety, and we have to...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello and a very good evening to you. This is Charlie Rowley sitting in for Peter Cardwell, who is hopefully enjoying the remainder of what has been an absolute scorcher of a bank holiday Monday. I hope you're well too. I hope you've had a great time. I hope you've been sunning yourselves. I hope you've been having maybe a little shandy or a white wine spritzer somewhere, or an appetizer, something soft to keep you cool during what has been a record-breaking May Day bank holiday weekend of weather, and more to come next week. We do like to moan about it though, don't we? It's either too hot or too cold, and you know, that's typically British. But I think everybody has enjoyed putting on their shorts and t-shirts, and some people not even putting that on, which has been a bit of a sight for sore eyes. But there we are. The less said about that, the better. That's just down my street. We've got a great show lined up for you for the next 2 hours. Just had a great hour. In this coming hour, we'll be talking about Baroness Casey, one of the most leading politicians. She's a crossbencher. She sits in the House of Lords. She's done countless work when it comes to the grooming gang scandal, when it comes to rape victims, and she has declared, having done all of the work that she's taken part in, that she has failed the grooming gang victims. That'd be a fascinating conversation I'll be having in just a few minutes' time with Marlon West, who's the father of a grooming gang's victim. That'll be an incredibly important conversation. I just want to read a few of your messages that have come through just before we crack on. Hi, Charlie. This is from Hev. Nice to see you have pulled yourself together after this morning. You had me crying too. Have a great show. For those of you who didn't know what was happening this morning, I was here in breakfast with the wonderful Ian Collins, sitting in for the even more wonderful Jeremy Carl, and we had quite a, I think it was the weather, we had quite a delusional morning. Somebody had messaged to say that they were struggling slightly with the weather, not in a huge way, so don't panic too much, but they said that they were working in a caravan, and their caravan got to the highs of 46 degrees. What should they do? And I just politely pointed out that given the temperature only reached 32 degrees outside, you're probably better off going outside. And anyway, all hell broke loose. After that, we couldn't quite contain ourselves because of the suggestions that were coming in thick and fast on how to stay cool. But thank you, Hev. I have pulled myself together, and thanks so much for listening. Great to have your company. Hi, Charlie. With regards to the recent rape judgment, I sadly think that rape is now normalised. Great to see you back on the box. That's from Glenn and Catterick. And Glenn, I think you're absolutely right. You know, it is the reason why too many rapes don't go reported, and that's, you know, at a time when they then do get reported, I should say, there isn't the conviction because it takes so long to get those cases through the criminal justice system, and therefore, you know, we don't get those justice for those victims. And then it smacks you right in the face when you hear a judgment that we've heard over the last week where a judge has failed to sentence 3 teenage boys, citing lack of IQ and good behaviour during the during the trial. Therefore, Judge Nicholas Rowland thought that they shouldn't be sentenced at all, that they should just be given a rehabilitation order, even when a knife was used, when the boys filmed their terrible crimes. I think that is a pathetic excuse from this judge. I've no bones about that. They should be behind bars, and that is the review that is taking place by the Attorney General. He's got 28 days to overturn that decision or ask it to be looked at, and we all hope, I'm sure, he'll come to the decision that we are all thinking. Talk, a great show. Charlie, oh, I like your style. Your hour with Ian this morning was hilarious. Well, we've just had an hour here now, which I hope is equally as entertaining. I really enjoyed it, and it cheered me up. I wonder how the lady in the static caravan got through the day. That's Sue from Chelmsford. Well, I hope she's still with us. I hope maybe she's still listening, if her radio is still operating. I'm not sure. Can radios operate in 46 degrees heat? We'll never know. More of your calls and text I'll be reading out throughout the next 2 hours. This is Charlie Radio on the Evening Exchange. Please get in touch. Call us on 0344 499 1000. That's 0344 499 1000. You can send a voice note on that message. We like to hear voice notes. It can be through a WhatsApp. Just send a short note and we'll get it on as soon as we can. Or text the word TALK to 87222, or follow us and send a message on X at talkTV, followed by your message. Now, as I said before, delighted to be joined now by Marlon West, the father of the grooming gang's victim. He joins me now on the back of what has been probably a harrowing week when you're hearing the decisions that are coming out of our judiciary and our judicial service, where a judge has failed to convict just rapists in this country, boys of a teenage age that should be behind bars but have only been let off by having a rehabilitation order. Marlon, I just want to take your view as you see it on the state of the UK when it comes to our criminal justice system, and particularly when it comes to the horror of rape.
So it's interesting. Only today, I've had a local survivor come to me, who's a young woman now, a 13-year-old. When she was 13, she was raped and trafficked, and she's come to my house today, and I've got the letter with me now. The CPS have refused to investigate because it happened in 1997. And it's appalling, even though there's numerous witnesses. And I just keep hearing this all the time, constantly, of these rapists who are getting away with it.
And, you know, why do you think that is? Why is there a lack of will, in that sense, then, from the CPS or the authorities to go and look into it? Is it just too difficult? What is it in your view that you think that actually the system just isn't working for victims?
I do believe it's around the ethnicity. It's exactly the same with my daughter. I speak to loads of families weekly across the UK, and they just keep hearing the same story, and I do think it's down to ethnicity, and especially with local Labour councils as well, because it's impacts on their votes.
You're absolutely right. And look, let's be upfront about it. What Baroness Casey was talking about and what she's talked about today is where she said she has failed the grooming gang victims. This is the Pakistani grooming gang that has existed in our country, where this government failed at the very start to launch a national inquiry, something that, to me, and you don't have to be political at all, or particularly political in any way, to think that that would have been the most obvious thing a government can do when you've got evidence from local councils, from local authorities, from police, from children's services, adult social care services, all people in positions of power and authority that were all reporting on something, saying something's not quite right here. The idea that the government was going to then allow local authorities to investigate locally, to mark their own homework, I think a lot of people would be incredibly upset by that. Indeed, they were.
Yeah, I agree. Baroness Casey has apologised, and I have got mixed feelings on this. I'm thankful she's raised her hand and said that, which is brilliant. However, she had 10 years to do something about this, so it doesn't let her off scot-free. Far from it. It's no secret. I've had meetings with Andy Burnham because I'm based in Manchester. Really nice guy, lovely, but he did nothing. He did the Baird inquiry with Dame Vera Baird. My daughter is in that inquiry. We've never heard anything since. Nothing has changed. And, Manchester's nothing special. This is happening all over the UK. And it's about time they all stood up, started to change the law. Even the inquiry, what they're putting forward at the moment, I find it disgraceful. It's £65 million they're putting towards that. Why does it cost £65 million? And who's making money out of that? But, Baroness Casey has made money when she was doing the ICSA and stuff like that. It's appalling.
Well, of course, and it was also in 2014, Professor Alexis J found that at least 1,400 children had been systematically raped, trafficked and intimidated, mainly by men of Pakistani heritage in Rotherham between 1997 and 2013. And she concluded, it was concluded then that the police and local authorities had repeatedly failed to protect those children. So it's local authorities failing to do what it should be its number one job, which is to protect some of the most innocent and vulnerable people in our society. So, I mean, as you say, you welcome 10 years on Baroness Casey apologising, but is it, it might be too late? Is it
it's
just
a little too late?
It's a little too late. Is it just her fault though? Is it, is it this government? Is it successive governments, previous governments?
No, it's systematic. And, again, I've said this a number of times. This is down to votes. That's all they care about. They don't care about young girls being raped. It is purely down to votes and how it impacts on the community. And that's all parties, not just Labour. Historically Tories as well. And that's all they care about, in my opinion.
So I was going to ask you, I mean, that ties in nicely because, Kemi Badenoch has been particularly strong on this. She's a relatively new leader of the Conservative Party. Nigel Farage and Reform have been very strong on this too. I mean, it's not a leading question. I mean, but I've just highlighted those two as individuals that have actually spoken out about this issue previously and quite strongly, in my view. There might be others. But do you feel that they would be able to grasp this issue better, or do you think all politicians are just the same? It's just empty promises.
So no, I have worked with Kemi. I've done a couple of press conferences with her, and I will say, heart's in place with the survivors, and she's been really good. But we've still got 14 years of Tories. she's been a lot better in Labour. Like I say, you know, I met Jess Phillips. When I asked Jess Phillips 18 months ago for a national inquiry, she put a hand in my face and said, no, we've had the ICSA, which I found really insulting because it's more about white institutes rather than what I call street grooming by Muslim men. Again, it's no secret, I was one of the leads on the rape gang inquiry. And Rupert Lowe was great. He actually did it and let me be involved in that. There's a couple of politicians out there that do want to make changes, but it's so big. Like you say, it goes down to local level.
And is that the problem, as you say? So you've got some politicians that are prepared to actually call it out for what it is, to say, look, you know, this is a specific problem with a particular part of our country. You know, it is a Pakistani, there's a subsection of the Pakistani men that have groomed, targeted young white girls, British girls, in particular parts of our country, that they have a network operating amongst them right across the country, where too many people of that same origin, from a Pakistani background, have turned a blind eye. And it needs to be looked into. So you've got politicians that are prepared to say it for what it is, for the actual truth of the matter, but then you've got politicians in power who have constituencies, largely heavily populated constituencies of a Muslim faith more broadly, not necessarily just Pakistani, but who might be more offended by that accusation, and therefore you've got politicians not then, other politicians not stepping up to say it as it is and just looking for votes in order just to be re-elected. Is that how you see it?
I do. There's that part of it, and I do believe the other part of it. So I'm a qualified mental health nurse. I've worked for the NHS for 30 years. I have to be so careful what I say, even if it's factual evidence, because of fear of losing my job, which in some way, I walked away from the NHS in October last year because I needed to be more vocal. And there is that pressure. If you call this out and you work for you're a civil servant, it's extremely frowned upon. And I think there is politicians out there who are feared of being called racist. And it really, really upsets me because we're not racist. It is factual evidence.
Marley, I think you're absolutely right. And it's just, for me, politicians unable to just articulate it properly. You're right, you know, people, you know, we should be able to have free speech in this country, absolutely. I mean, this is the home of free speech and the home of common sense, I hope. So, you know, all views are welcome here today on Talk. But I think it's making the point that you're not racist by talking about a particular community or a particular problem that is just impacting a particular community, or who the perpetrators are from a particular community or share particular characteristics or have a particular background, because we target people all the time. I mean, you were just talking about as a mental health you know, trained you know, professional there, you will target specific groups of people in order to make sure that they get the best possible outcomes. You'll know certain trends and data of particular groups of people that might be a minority group. So, but you don't say, well, because the majority of people, you know, in this country don't fit that certain criteria, therefore we're not going to look into them. So, and same with education. You know, you can target maybe young boys from a particular group to say, right, they need to increase their reading and writing skills. So we're going to target boys in particular parts of the country in order for them to achieve. But the majority of the population are female, you could argue. But you don't put those things to one side because they're a minority group. You target it and you make it better. Why haven't we done this in this case, where the throwback that people would say to you and me, Marlon, is that the majority of people that commit crimes in this country, that commit rapes, excuse me, will be white British. Now, that might be true because the majority of the population is white British, but that doesn't mean you can't look at what's happening at the next level down, where there is a disproportionate number of these crimes, these grooming gang crimes, being carried out by a small section of society, but the crimes are disproportionate to that number. Therefore, we need to target those. We need to target those men.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, what I would say, for me, it was an eye-opener being involved in a rape gang inquiry, and this really upsets me. It is happening now while I'm sat here. This hasn't gone away, and it's getting worse. And if we keep ignoring it, because for whatever reason, being called racist or votes, this will get much, much worse. And it just needs to stop. I believe all parties should come together and work together on this.
Well, that was going to be my final question to you, Marl. I mean, it's harrowing to hear you say that things are getting worse. Just when we've had so many reviews, when we've had these kinds of horrific stories in the headlines day after day after day. I mean, how has it got worse is that, I suppose, one question. But what is it, in your view, apart from all those parties coming together to tackle it, how can they tackle it? What do they do if they all come together? If I had them all around this studio today, and including yourself, and if you had from Rupert Lowe to Zach Polanski, Ed Davey, Kemi Badenoch, Nigel Farage, and Keir Starmer, we're all here. What is it that you would say to them all today? How...
We all need to be in agreement. These are our children. And another thing what I've said a lot is there's this attitude or belief that it's only your troubled girls. They do not care. So, middle class, working class, they will target any child. The evidence is in there. A lot of the time, police forces, I know for Greater Manchester Police, they're not recording ethnicity, but we all need to sit down, completely agree that the safety of our children, because, majority of them are girls, but in certain areas across the UK, there's boys as well, definitely. And start looking at it professionally. The first thing we need to do is get local authorities to start being accountable and actually working with safeguarding. And then second to that is change the legal system, because a lot of these historic rapes, they're just not prosecuting, even with outstanding evidence.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people would agree with that, Marlon, but people will be, holding their head in their hands, because they would imagine that this should be happening. Where there is the evidence, these prosecutions should be taking place, and they should be not taking place in, 18 months to up to 6 years or even longer. That very example that you said at the very start of this conversation, any evidence where there is enough evidence of criminality, it should be looked into, it should be dealt with rapidly, and there should be prosecutions brought forward in record time.
Like I do strongly believe if you've got a professional who works for the government, like a social worker or even a mental health nurse, and they clearly know that a child is being raped and they've turned a blind eye, they should be prosecuted and go to prison. That would change a lot.
I think you're absolutely right. Making sure that people that are in positions of power and responsibility that don't do the very fundamental basics of safeguarding, it seems to me, for children. If you know something's taking place and you don't call it out and it's not reported, even if you have to report your peers, it shouldn't be difficult if it's that kind of crime that's taking place. Then you're absolutely right. Are you complicit in that crime? Maybe people think that you are.
Absolutely, yes.
Marlon, we've got to leave it there. But thank you so much for joining me on Bank Holiday Monday. And I hope you can have some sort of relaxing evening tonight. Thank you for joining me. That's Marlon West there, father of the grooming gangs victim, where Baroness Casey, who had done a lot of work into the grooming gangs issues and multiple issues actually surrounding rape. She has now said, I failed grooming gang victims. She's held her hands up and apologised for some of that, which obviously has come a little too late to some victims' families and the victims. But we'll be talking about more on that on the next hour. Drop us a call. Let me know what you think of that conversation with the great Marlon West there. 0344 499 1000. This is the Evening Exchange. This is Talk.
Current affairs, international news, letting criminals off while sending... Oi! Oi! You shut up! I'm trying to record something.
Stand by for 3 powerhouse hours of breaking news, challenging views. I don't give a flying damn about international law. I think people will viscerally reject this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, welcome back to the Evening Exchange with me, Charlie Rowley, sitting in for Peter Cardwell. And what a great hour and a half, almost an hour and a half that we've had. We've had some great interviews there, particularly just that conversation with Marlon West, father of grooming gangs victim, and who's been involved in the grooming gang scandal to try and get justice for the victims. Let me know what you thought of that. 0344 499 1000. You can send a text to talk at 87222, or follow and send a message on X at talkTV, followed by your message. We've got a couple of messages to read out here. Talk. The judge should be sacked. This is the judge who failed to sentence those 3 teenage boys who were convicted of rape. Instead, he gave them a rehabilitation order, thinking that that was enough. In my view, and by the judge of your texts and calls that have come in, you all agree that that is not enough. More should be done to send a very clear message that obviously rape means time behind bars. Talk, somebody says here, oh, MG. It could be Michael Gove, my old boss. Who's to say? Who's to say? Oh, I'm told it's Melanie in Staffordshire. You know, close enough. The judge should be sacked. What is the point of young offenders institutions if child criminals do not go there? Well, I think that's a very good point, Michael or Madeline. You know, it is the weekend. You know, you never know. One could put on their high heels and a wig. No? Enough said about that, the better. Thank you, Madeline. That's very good. Talk, Dan from Kent. Good to see Benjamin What's-his-worth on. All opinions welcome on the channel of free speech. And you're absolutely right, Dan. This is, A, the home of common sense, but also the home of free speech. All opinions are welcome. We're not a station, we're not a show on the Evening Exchange, certainly not when I'm in the hot seat, that is going to block anybody's view. We should be having an open conversation. We should be learning from each other's view. We should be challenging each other's view, which is why I think there is so many problems in this country, because for so long we've been told we can't say this or we can't do that, or as Marlon was saying earlier on, if you dare raise the topic of somebody's ethnicity when it comes to a grooming gang scandal, you'll be called racist, you'll be called far right, and that drives people to have conversations maybe online or feel as though that people can't talk or speak out when they really should do, and that's when things get swept under the carpet and when we see these horrible crimes taking place. There's one from Glyn there, which I think I've already read out. But Robert Halstead says, hi, Charlie. Great to hear you back on Talk. Well, great to have your company, Robert. Please do us all a favour and stop calling these horrific excuses for humans who raped these poor girls boys. If they are as big as they believe in their heads to complete this hateful crime, then most certainly they are big enough to do the time. It's also terrible. Take care, Rob. Rob from Cheshire. Well, Rob, you're absolutely right. I think if you are big enough to commit a crime like that, you don't need any kind of IQ, in my view. You know, you should know absolutely what is right and wrong when it comes to consent. And the idea that just because you demonstrated good behaviour during a trial, that you don't get that time behind bars, that you just get some rehabilitation order, I think it's a disgrace. And the Attorney General should be looking into this case. If this Labour government wants any advice from me, as a former special advisor to the former government, I think this should be announced tomorrow. It doesn't take long to come to the conclusion, which we all know should be the right outcome, which this needs to be reviewed. Those boys need locking up. Now let's take some of your calls. I think we've got Georgia in London. Hello, Georgia.
Hello, Charlie. How are you?
Georgina, I apologise. Is it Georgia or Georgina?
It's Georgina. It's actually Georgiana, but everyone calls me Georgina.
Georgiana. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
I've been called worse. I really have.
Well, I've been watching the television for literally on politics for the last, I would say, 20 years. And the last 3 weeks, I've had to switch my television off. I've totally given up with watching any kind of politics on the media platforms. It just seems like a hopeless situation, Charlie, with no solutions. I mean, the amount of deceit, lies, sleaze, general skullduggery, it's become too much for me to bear. I mean, the last government was absolutely terrible, but this Labour government has taken abhorrence to a whole new level, and the mayor we have at the moment needs putting in prison for what he's done to our capital city. I don't recognise it anymore.
You're no fan. You're no fan of Sir Sadiq Khan, Georgiana?
No, I'm not. I'm not any fan. I mean, the government we've got now, they are treating this country like some sort of, they're a criminal organisation. They've robbed us blind, Charlie, with taxes, taken away our borders, so we don't really have a country anymore. They're letting unwanted third worlds into our towns and villages and cities, and we're being attacked on the streets, raped, robbed, murdered. Our children are being attacked, Charlie, and raped, and we can't retaliate. We've been silenced for the good of cultural cohesion.
But is this, Georgia, just on that point, I mean, is this just this Labour government's problem? I mean, are they
not
this
at
is
all.
previous
Not
government
at
as
all.
well. They've got lots of answers
It was the previous government, the Boris wave, but you see, a government's got to have the political will to stop this, and we haven't got a government that either has got, the testicular fortitude to do that. There isn't a man amongst them, I think I've got more testosterone than they've got, and they've got to do the job, and what they're doing, they're putting us all on offer. That's what they're doing. We've now got swathes of London or other cities in our country with foreign nationals that have made these parts of the country their own, and we're no longer welcome in these areas. These foreign nationals, they don't want to integrate or assimilate into our country and its culture. This government has destroyed our country, Charlie, and bottomed our economy.
Well, a lot of people would agree with that, but the question is, I mean, we had a general election 2 years ago where the Labour government were elected in. You're obviously not a big fan of them and think that they've done not a great job, but the previous government, the Tory government, had 14 years to sort it out. And so who is the person to come in and change it?
Right. Well, I'm a little bit worried now. I mean, I've been a reform woman since I last voted, but now I'm worried because we have Restore and we've got Advance UK, and I like all three chaps. I think they've all got the real verve to do something about the problems we've got, and believe me, we've got a lot of problems in this country. But I think with them, you've got the three wise men, and if they were wise, they'd all come together and they'd be one. Well, they'd be the A-team. No one would be able to get by them, But whilst they've got their own parties, this is diluting the strength. So I'm really worried that, having the three, it's going to split the vote and we are going to have a problem. They need to get over their own egos. It's the ego thing that really annoys me.
You're absolutely right. I mean, there is a campaign, as it happens, in the Daily Mail that I happen to read amongst lots of other publications, including The Sun and The Times of this building, and all other publications that are available. But the Daily Mail in particular they're running a campaign. It's called Unite the Right, and it's doing exactly what you're sort of talking about, which is trying to get people to come together. I don't think, for what it's worth, by the way, Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage will be able to sit down in a room and agree on anything. I think their relationship is over. But the question is, without going into the specifics of the Makerfield by-election, obviously there was a conversation from the Tory party. The senior MPs within the Conservative Party were saying, actually, that they shouldn't be standing a candidate. This should be just a complete runoff between Labour and Reform. Anything else might dilute that vote. Anything else might bleed votes away to stop Andy Burnham, if that's what you want to do. And similarly, the Greens have said the same. Caroline Lucas, former leader of the Green Party, said that she wouldn't have fielded a candidate because she doesn't want there to be that split. I mean, how do you see that playing out? Should the right unite? Should there be other candidates in that by-election?
Well, I do think that we need to sort of unite the right, but not as far as the Conservative Party is concerned. I think they're dead in the water. They're a moribund party as far as I'm concerned. I was a Conservative for 45 years. But, you know, after Boris, I'm sorry, I would never vote for them again. You know, but Andy Burnham, he's got Bob Hope and no hope of winning that election. I'm telling you, I'm not a betting woman, Charlie. I put a substantial amount of money on the nose that he's not going to win. I think Reform, I think they've got that. Reform. I mean, in that area, I think that Reform have won, is it 23 out of 24?
In the local elections, they did, yes, yeah. But the polls are suggesting that, you know, name recognition, it could just do it for Andy Burnham. You never know.
No, he's not going to win. No, not a snowball in hell's chance has he got to win. People are wise now. They've had enough. They've seen the deterioration with the last Conservative government. They've watched the deterioration appallingly with this Labour government. I mean, every promise that Keir Starmer and his motley crew made, they've broken. People are suffering in this country now. I was listening to that young man who was on your show before me, talking about the little girls and the rape gangs and goodness. I mean, these are our children. Whether you've birthed these children or not, every child in this country are our children, and we have got to protect them. This government are not interested. They're more interested in looking after come-overs who are coming over on boats. I'm sorry, we've got to now grit the teeth. There's some serious decisions need making. We need to close our borders. That's the first one. And we need to start deporting these illegal immigrants. We need to start getting them out. We are not the international welfare service, Charlie. We're not. We can't afford it. Our welfare service now is decimated. We can't even afford to look after our own. And I think, you know, it's time now that we need to put our own first.
Georgiana, I think you have spoken for the nation this evening on this beautiful bank holiday Monday. Please do call again. Hopefully I'll be back in the hot seat and we can talk some more. That was Georgiana there in London. Let's go to another call. Claude in Richmond.
Oh, hi, Charlie.
Hello. What would you like to say?
Sure. I've been listening and I fully agree with your last caller. I do think we are a country that's breaking at the seams. And as a victim myself who's not been with my sisters since 2023 and been asking for a meeting with the Prime Minister and found that all of the governments have apparently had this kind of, you could say, breakdown of crisis because they've not had the right people in the roles. We've got a mayor that's not really suitable for his role. We've also got a commissioner who's not delivering and people are not feeling that justice is being delivered. We also got Casey, who's not being listened to when the Metropolitan is not putting in the measures that need to protect the children and our British rights as British citizens. We feel like we don't have a human rights within our country. And if we are going to go forward, we need to ensure that people feel listened to and feel represented when it comes to their political vote and the political will and the best solutions to keep our children safe and also address the social issues and attacking social media, which is not even just the problem, it's the society issue if we talk about mental health and everything.
Well, just on the idea of victims then, do you think the laws that we have in this country and the decisions that are made within our judiciary, that they tend to be now, and with the police and police investigations, because you mentioned the Metropolitan Police there, do you think that the weight of those authorities is more on the side of the perpetrator or the attacker than the victim?
Very much so. And I think there's a big imbalance of injustice when it comes to people of colour and people who are of colour who built this country and built Britain as well. As a black young person myself and as my sisters have been taken, I felt that there's been other cases that have been prioritised while I've had to suffer the loss of missing birthdays, celebrations, and having my sisters in the hands of criminals right now. And I've been very vocal on social media about it all because, you know, if we don't have human rights and if we don't have people who speak out, then how are we able to make a better Britain for the citizens of Britain?
Well, Claude, I think lots of people would want to see a better Britain. You're absolutely right. And, you know, where does it start? It should start with the criminal justice system. I think, the government has got no other job in terms of its priorities than to protect its citizens. And when you have a two-tier justice system, a two-tier policing system, then of course, people start to lose faith. That social contract between the citizen and the state gets broken down. That's when we see these kinds of stories that we're reading about, that we're hearing about, and where people come into the country. If we don't have the protection, if we don't have our borders, if we can't protect our state, then people go on to commit those heinous crimes. Thank you so much, Claude. We'll be taking more calls in just a minute after this break. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good evening to you. This is Charlie Rowley on the Evening Exchange, sitting in for Peter Cardwell on this glorious bank holiday Monday. Keep your calls and texts coming in. 0344 499 1000. That's the call, the number to call, or send a voice note. You can also text the word Talk to 87222, or follow and send a message to us on X at talkTV. But that number again to call or send a voice note: 0344 499 1000. Want your views on everything we've talked about so far, from the grooming gang scandal to the justice system in this country, clearly not fit for purpose, when the Attorney General has to review the case of 3 boys that should have gone to prison for the rapes of those teenage girls. That hasn't happened. It's beggars belief, in my view. And all things happening in this Labour government. It'll be a big week ahead, I can guarantee you. But how many times do we say that? It's always a big week for this Labour government, isn't it? Right, up next, we're going to be talking now to Henry Bolton. Now, Henry Bolton is someone I know, knows all things about Russia and defence, and all kinds of defence systems, because we've seen recently the Defence Secretary's own plane that was flying back, intercepted effectively by Russian aircraft, where the GPS system seemed to be blown out. A 3-hour flight where they had to rely on, I guess, manual pilot. Or manual piloting, if that's a word. Henry, good evening. Can you hear me?
I can, yes. Good evening. Hi, Charlie.
What do you make of it all? Does Moscow now just laugh at us? Do they take us for fools? Do they not think that our defences are capable of doing anything, that they're just now toying with us in this way?
I think taking us for fools is probably exaggerating the situation, but I do think that they're well aware that our capabilities are they're far less than the British government's rhetoric suggests. You talk about John Healey, the Defence Secretary's flight from Estonia back to the UK being targeted by GPS jamming. I have to say, that's not unique by any means. The Russians, for well over a year, probably 2.5 years, have been doing this to just about every aircraft that has flown in that area. But of course, with the Defence Secretary on board, it's a particularly sensitive issue. But civilian airliners and so on have reported this for a long time. There's nothing new in this Russian activity. We've seen a significant ramping up, sort of really in April, of Russian activity in the air, probing UK and allied airspaces with strategic reconnaissance aircraft, strategic bombers and so on. We've seen the underwater activity as well ramp up. There's been an Akula attack submarine supporting two very specialist submarines from Russia's main directorate of deep sea research, which is tasked with doing reconnaissance of underwater infrastructure and preparing sabotage for underwater critical infrastructure, communications cables, that sort of thing. And they've been operating in the North Sea, in the gap between the United Kingdom, Iceland, and Greenland, and in the North Atlantic, and including in the UK's exclusive economic zone waters, so sort of 200 miles within the UK. That's our jurisdiction. So the UK has been monitoring that. We've been monitoring the aircraft. And of course, then we've got a whole range of other activities that have been going on. They're not really discussed in the public domain, which sort of changes in the narrative, which is diplomatic activity. There's a whole range of activities that Russia is embarking upon constantly, although we've seen a ramping up of it. And the reason for all of this is that there's really two main reasons. Russia at the moment is, in some respects, on the back foot in the war in Ukraine, and they're trying to deter, particularly UK. They see the UK as having been a leader in rallying Allied support for Ukraine, but send the message to the UK that it wouldn't be a good idea at this time to further ramp up that support to Ukraine, but also to so it's a way of influencing the UK governments and Allied governments in their decision making as to how to confront Russian activity elsewhere. So, and the second thing is that they are actually learning more and more about our infrastructure, how it could be attacked, and our responses to it. So it's a constant sort of testing as well. So there's a lot going on, a hell of a lot. It's been very busy the last few weeks.
So is it just the case then that Russia are just projecting this sort of demonstration of strength? As you say, they've entered international airspace, they've looked at our underground cables, or got close to looking at them through submarines. But we, you know, the Defence Secretary here has said that we see you, we're following you, we know what you're doing. But is it the case that on the back of the Ukrainian war then, of which the UK has been a very, very loyal supporter to Ukraine, that Russia has sort of ramped up this sort of projection where they may not actually pose, although we can't sort of, you know, completely dismiss it, but they don't pose the biggest of threat of which they would want us to believe that they do?
Yeah, I mean, they do pose a threat, but no, their intention is not, I don't believe, at the present time, at least, to attack the United Kingdom or an ally of ours. What they're trying to do is send the message that they can do if they so wish. And I think you earlier asked, well, are they taking us for fools? I mean, it is never wise to speak sort of tough when you don't have the means to back it up. And the Prime Minister, I think, was incredibly unwise a few weeks ago to say that the United Kingdom would act against sanctioned Russian ships going through UK waters, and then fail utterly to take any action. And in fact, that then triggered the deployment of a Russian frigate supported by a supply ship, which has effectively been escorting sanctioned Russian tankers and so on through UK waters, through the Channel and so on. Sort of a warning, you know, even if you were to act, be aware we've got a big stick in the region that is here to defend that shipping. And so, in a sense, we are demonstrating our A, lack of capability, and B, lack of political will to follow up on our rhetoric. Those two things are extremely dangerous because they send the signals to Russia that actually if the UK were to be robust in, for example, defending the High North or Ukraine or another ally, then Russia is getting more confident in its ability to take us on, destroy critical infrastructure, whatever it may be, in a very limited, asymmetric way without suffering any retaliation from us. It's dangerous.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, look, you know, you're an international security expert. You know, when you see things like the US intervention in Iran, and we've now seen what's played out, which is the Strait of Hormuz being completely closed off, and where actually when we were not involved in that attack by the US. We weren't with our American allies, something of which the President has criticised, obviously, Sir Keir Starmer for. But what has happened, we had to do, was we had to send HMS Dragon to our air base in Cyprus to protect the people there, but we couldn't get it off the dock. It took 3 weeks before it was even undergoing sort of repairs. Do Russia look at that and think, right, what they think about the UK or what the international community thinks about the UK's defences have clearly been found wanting, and that's why then they go and do the things that everything that you've sort of set out, really, how you've described Russia projecting its strength towards the UK?
I mean, Russia is constantly testing us to figure out what capabilities we've already got. Then they see other things that they're not responsible for. They didn't trigger the US-Israeli strikes on Iran, but they see how we're tested by that situation as well. They also measure, of course, something happens in the Middle East or it happens in another part of the world, how much of bandwidth, political bandwidth, diplomatic bandwidth, military bandwidth that takes up in the UK. And that means, when we're deploying assets to the Middle East, where are our assets back in home waters? We don't have enough. And indeed, the government, I would argue, has been worse than negligent. It has been dangerously complacent, despite all the problems it's got, in its response to the present defence situation. The UK in the last 18 months, 2 years, has moved from number 2 in terms of expenditure in NATO to about number 14 or 15 on conventional defence. All our other allies see a threat that they are responding to. The United Kingdom has the most appallingly inefficient method of budgeting for our defence, procuring for our defence equipment, and preparing the United Kingdom for its defence and national security. It is appalling, and the British public, I'm afraid to say, through the rhetoric of the government, which is there's no drama, which is rather the British way, but there's no drama, there's no talking up the threat. In fact, quite the opposite. All sounds as though the government's in control. The government is not in control. The government has virtually no options when it comes to the United Kingdom's defence and national security. It is a cupboard that is not only bare, the shelves are collapsing. So, and the delay in the government's publication of the Defence Investment Plan, which is if you like, the funding behind the Security Defence Review, which was reasonable, but weak in many areas, but still reasonable. That delay has actually started to damage British military companies who provide us with the hardware, if you like, the guns, the bullets, the tanks, the aircraft, with which we equip our armed forces, because they've got no funding coming through. So we are compounding an already extremely dangerous problem, and the British public are not being informed as to what the situation really is. It's a problem.
Well, you're absolutely right. Well, and apart from that, it's all going incredibly well. You've set out all the problems there perfectly.
The sun is shining, Charlie.
The sun is shining, exactly. We've got that for the next week. Good weather, if not
small boats.
Good defences. Excellent. Henry, thank you so much for your time on this Bank Holiday Monday, and thank you for setting that out so clearly. We've obviously got to do a lot more on the defence front. Let us know what you think about that. 0344 499 1000. We'll be taking more calls and messages after this break.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good evening and welcome back to the Evening Exchange with me, Charlie Rowley, sitting in for Peter Cardwell. We've got loads of calls and texts coming in. Keep them coming in. We will get through to them, I promise you. In the third hour, we will be doing an awful lot of engagement with you lovely listeners who have decided to tune in on this Bank Holiday Monday. A scorcher of a Bank Holiday Monday it's been. So thank you so much for your company. Now, another story that broke this afternoon, Peter Murrell, former chief executive of the SNP. He was convicted of embezzlement. This is funds that went to the SNP that should have been used for campaigning purposes. Seems to have been squirreled away for many other purposes. Well, I'm delighted to be joined now. Who can tell us all about it? Former SNP MP Angus MacNeil, who's on the line. Good evening, Angus.
Good evening there, hi, and I wish I could tell you all about it, but I'll try and tell you what I can.
Come on, tell us. What's been going on? What's been going on in the SNP?
Well, I think it's a very sad state of affairs. It's very sad for many people who today, I mean, I've suspected and I've expected this outcome. Alex Salmond himself told me, in fact, that this would be the outcome. He'd plead guilty, there'd be no trial. There'd been avoidance of questions and perhaps follow-on things, and Alec could see a calculation and a metric and a reason for this happening. Alec was as ever a step ahead, but we are where we are with many people upset, disappointed, not understanding what's happened. But I'm afraid the sad reality that many people have got to face is this has been coming down the tracks for a very long time. It's 7 years now since Chris McElhenney asked at the National Executive Committee of the Scottish National Party where the £482,000 that was raised in 2017, where that had gone. Because they were starting another fundraiser. Nicola, he was closed down. He was subject then to a complaint about the gender ideology stuff that was rampant in Scotland at the time, and then he was barred. He didn't pass vetting to become a European Parliament candidate. So there was a lesson learned and a signal sent out to a number of people that this is the sort of thing that will happen. And it was a subtle thing, and it could be explained away. You've got to remember
just before the detail is absolutely necessary to get to the bottom and to explain what's happening. But just so we're absolutely clear from the start, just for my viewers and listeners that might not be overly familiar with the SNP or what's happened. So this was 480,000, is that right? That was raised for the SNP that should have gone. Am I right in saying it should have gone specifically for party campaign funds? So that's either at a national election, I suppose, or a general election, or specifically.
This was money ring-fenced for a referendum. There was a £1 million target done in 2017. Right. 482,000 was raised. And now, 5 years ago, this is 7 years ago, Chris McElhenney's asking questions. 7 years ago, Chris McElhenney suffers consequences for asking these questions. 5 years ago, there's television interviews from Nicola Sturgeon saying things are okay, the party's finances have never been stronger, all the money's been accounted for. She's the party leader, giving people assurances that all is fine. And now today, we find out that her husband of the time, now her ex-husband, has pleaded guilty to embezzling 459,000, not a sum far off the money that was ring-fenced for independence.
Yes, curious and curious. So, well, we've got a clip there. As you say, Nicola Sturgeon was the former wife of John Swinney when she was
of Peter Murrell.
Of Peter Murrell, sorry. Of course, yes, you're absolutely right. Gosh, that would be a scandal, wouldn't it? If there was a marriage there. Nicola Sturgeon, leader of the SNP, married to Peter Murrell of Newham, who's the chief executive of the SNP. Here's now what the current leader of the SNP and First Minister of Scotland, John Swinney, here's what he had to say earlier on.
I'm sorry to people who are affected, okay? So I'm quite happy to say that. But my point is that the person responsible for this is Peter Murrell. It's not my conduct that's got to this situation, it's Peter Murrell's. So that's the only point I'm making, but if it helps, I'll say sorry to everyone involved.
Oh, well, that's okay then. It's nothing to do with the SNP. This is all down to Peter Murrell. Is that right, Angus?
Well, it's quite amazing to me that people like Peter Murrell and associates of his were leaving no stone unturned to try and find something in Alex Salmond, who was an innocent man and declared an innocent man in a court of law. The same people are now disinterested in finding very much what is interested at the time, were been disinterested for the last 7 years, what is interested when the party treasurer, Douglas Chapman, could not see the accounts of the party. Utterly disinterested. The party leader knew Nicola Sturgeon knew that the Treasurer couldn't see those accounts. When she became party leader, her husband, the CEO, Peter Murrell, was advised by Alex Salmond to stand down, that this was an unhealthy situation to have a husband and wife at the top. The issue isn't husband and wife, the issue is she's party leader, and at best she's been very negligent with £459,000. There's a lot of good people's money got into that. You know, we're looking for a country, looking for a campaign for independence. She fluffs that each and every time. Scotland's still in the UK, still suffering, not in the place that it should be with Norway, Iceland, Ireland, Denmark. It is in the UK, and the money is gone.
Well, it's
I hope that the money is recovered. You know, that the proceeds are grand, that this goes back towards the SNP and goes back to the donors.
It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, Angus. We've got to leave it there. Sorry, but thank you so much.
At 11:16 this morning, two men, aged 76 and 34, were attacked on Highfield Avenue in Barnet. They suffered stab wounds in the attack and are now being looked after in hospital.
We need to make sure that when people carry out these activities, they feel the full force of the law. People think they can get away with this. The person who firebombed a few weeks ago is out on bail. That's not full force of the law.
This crisis, it's a crisis for all of us. It's not enough to simply say we stand with Jewish communities. Of course we do, but we must show it and act it. And the responsibility lies with each and every one of us, because it is our fight too.
Let's stop importing people from countries where anti-Semitism is the norm. And if our London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, in his infinite wisdom and belief in diversity, thinks that's the sort of diverse view that it's okay to have on the streets of London and the police don't get involved, don't be shocked, and don't you bloody dare claim to be shocked or upset or care about Jewish people being stabbed on the streets of our capital city in broad daylight. This is on you.
You keep getting proven right every single time. Jews are not safe in this country.
Well, absolutely. No one can be surprised or feeling shocked that this happened. No Jew certainly is. I mean, we had Zach Polanski last week saying this was just a perceived threat. Well, we can see this isn't any perception. This is real. This is happening on the streets. This isn't just an anti-Semitic terror attack. This is an attack on Britain, on the Western liberal democracy and values.
The first politician that uses the word shocking, I might just go and throttle him, because this is anything but shocking. It's the most expected thing is almost overdue, if you ask me. Because, I mean, I just left Israel last week. I thought it'd be the last time we were woken up by explosions, but clearly not.
The Jewish community is our community, and their safety is our safety. And we have to make it absolutely...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good evening to you and welcome back to the Evening Exchange with me, Charlie Rowley, sitting in for Peter Cardwell and enjoying far too much of what Angus McNeil had to say there at the last hour before we had to cut him off because we were going to the top of this hour. So apologies, Angus. But one of the many stories that we're covering today, not least of all that Peter Murrell has now been convicted of embezzlement, an SNP former chief executive seemingly squirreling away over £400,000. Now that has come to a conclusion, but it's nothing to do with the SNP, according to leader John Swinney. That story, on top of many others that we're talking about, including the failure to convict or sentence 3 teenage boys for horrific rape, has caused consternation throughout the country, and rightly so, leaving political leaders to challenge that decision. The Attorney General is now going to look into it. He's got 28 days to review the case and work out what happens next. But people up and down the country, which you can absolutely tell from the calls and texts that have come in tonight, are furious that a judge has allowed 3 teenage boys, to not be behind bars tonight because they demonstrated good behaviour during the trial. Oh, well, that's okay then. They have a low IQ. Oh, well, so, you know, they're a bit thick. but they should know exactly what they should, how to behave when it comes to consent. Everybody should know that. You don't need to be particularly bright or intelligent or an academic to know that. That is no excuse on any level. And leaving the victims reading from the crimes that have been committed upon them, asking themselves, well, what's the point? What kind of message does that send to young boys right across the country? That you can apparently just go and commit these crimes, and if you get a judge like Nicholas Rowland, well, you'll just get off. You'll get a youth rehabilitation order. No time behind bars. So that's a story that, as I say, people have gone wild about today. We've also got Andy Burnham suggesting that he would reverse David Lammy's jury trial changes, so he would scrap the scrapping of jury trials, or lack of jury trials. Again, Labour on Labour. Is this psychodrama ever going to go away? Does the Labour Party actually know what it stands for? Does it know what it's doing? Because you've also got Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. Sir Sadiq Khan, I should say. I beg your apologies. Sorry, Mayor. He's coming out to criticise the Prime Minister today, saying that the Labour Party haven't got their message clear enough, that the Labour Party doesn't know really what it stands for, the direction that it's going in, and is very critical. He's seemingly rowing in behind his fellow mayor colleague, Andy Burnham. Let's see if that comes to fruition, if the man from Manchester does make it into Westminster. And because Andy Burnham, along with other leadership contenders such as Wes Streeting, have said in the last couple of weeks that they do want to see the UK rejoin the EU. We've got a spokesperson from the UK EU parliamentary authorities that says at the Parliamentary Assembly that we, the UK, if we were to go back into the EU, would have to give up the pound. Well, I'm not having it. Not on my watch. We must protect that pound at all costs. How on earth can we go back into an institution that we voted to leave on worse terms, having to pay more, take more regulation, and give up, as I say, another great British institution, which is our pound sterling? Well, anyway, that's enough of my pontificating. I'll get off my high horse and we'll go to the brilliant political editor of The Independent to talk through all of these stories and more. David Maddox. Good evening, David. Thank you for joining me on the Bank Holiday Monday.
Not at all. Good evening.
Can we start with just that harrowing case that I think has been across all the papers for a number of days now? This is the failure of Judge Nicholas Rowland to sentence those 3 teenage boys for rape, where they used their mobile phones to film the attack. A knife was involved. These are 2 separate attacks on these teenage girls. The judge decided to give them a rehabilitation order because they demonstrated good behaviour in the courtroom. That's a disgrace, isn't it?
I mean, it's absolutely shocking. And I mean, we saw even Darren Jones kind of getting very upset about it earlier on. I mean, you kind of got to wonder where the justice system's going. And there seems to be a real problem with sexual offences as well. You know, this isn't the first time that a sexual offence like this has come up with a surprisingly light sentence. And you got to remember as well, with the new threshold on prison sentences and things, you know, if it's anything less than a year, nobody's going to prison anyway, which is pretty stunning. And you know, the warning when that was done was, well, this is going to see a whole load of quite serious sexual offenders not go to prison. And I wonder if that played a role, frankly.
I think you're absolutely right. Look, you mentioned Darren Jones there. Darren Jones is the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, so a senior cabinet ranking position. It's in the Cabinet Office, so it has a link door to Number 10. It is the enforcer of what Number 10 wants to see. So he is not a junior member by any means. You're right, he was on the Sunday political shows with Lord Koonsberg on the BBC. Let's just have a clip of what he had to say.
As a minister, I'm not allowed to get ahead of the Attorney General's decision, but those girls deserve justice, as do their families, both for them, but also for other girls that are put in that position. And quite frankly, other boys need to know that they can't behave in that way and get away with it.
You are here as a minister, but I can actually tell from listening to you as a dad, I think you found that quite hard to watch and to listen to.
It was very hard to watch because no parent wants their daughter to be in those circumstances. And you don't want a society in which girls are growing up in those circumstances.
Well, fair play to Laura Koonsberg there, because she saw actually a minister and a man before her and a politician, senior politician, reacting in a very human way, as you say, David. And I think handled that very well. I'll get your thoughts on that, but also just on that show, if I can play this clip to you, there was also one of the victims.
the words hit like a rock straight in my face. He almost made it seem as if what the boys did was not okay, but it was okay in the eyes of the law because they were still children.
And what did that mean to you?
It meant that why did I sit and put myself through the pain of going to court, going through a trial, reliving everything because of evidence and watching it all happen again? It sort of gave me a sense of what's the point? Like, what was the point in putting me through that just to say that it's fine?
Well, what was the point there? I mean, harrowing stuff by one of the victims of that tragic case. David, the Attorney General was going to look into it. If I was advising the Labour government, if you were giving them any sort of tips from the front pages of the newspapers and headlines, you'd be saying to the Attorney General, just get on with it. You know, make it the decision, make it tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, in her defence, I mean, she often gets criticism, but the one Attorney General in recent years who never hesitated on cases like this was Suella Braverman when she held the position, and Labour are actually very critical of her for pursuing these sorts of cases where clearly the sentence had been, you know, it was not sufficient for the crime involved, and you'd hope that Lord Hermer pursues that sort of line because, you know, whether they're children or not, this is an incredibly serious crime, you know. I mean, and you just can't allow these things to really go relatively unpunished. I mean, I can't say completely unpunished because there was some sort of sentence, but it was so light that it's laughable, really.
Yeah, absolutely, proportionate by absolutely no means. Well, talking of juries, Andy Burnham today has also suggested that he would do a U-turn, another one, it seems to me, on David Lammy's proposals and to scrap jury trials. How does the Labour Party play this? What, when you've got, you know, if you're a backbench Labour MP or if you're a supporter, if you're going up to the Makerfield by-election, as encouraged by the Prime Minister, and to go and support, you know, which kind of Labour team do you support? Is it David Lammy's proposals, or is it now Andy Burnham's, the sort of the King of North that seems to be waiting in the wings to take over as PM?
Well, I mean, this slightly mad proposal only seems to have the support of the Prime Minister and the current Justice Secretary. I mean, they've lost an MP. They've expelled, or not expelled, suspended an MP, Carl Turner, over this. You know, and he's absolutely right because he points out that they constantly criticised any attempts to undermine jury trial by the previous government, and they were right to do so. Now they want to do the biggest kind of pullback of one of our ancient rights, you know, just to speed things up a little bit, you know, and maybe get some more people kind of sentenced who might not, who maybe shouldn't be sentenced, actually, you know, obviously not the ones we were just talking about, but I mean, it's bizarre, really, and yeah, I think that might be one of Andy Burnham's easier policies to announce. I think it'd be quite popular.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And without going into too much detail about the depths of the Makerfield by-election, but, you know, one of the other U-turns Andy Burnham seems to have made is whether or not he wants to rejoin the EU. Wes Streeting was very clear last week that he would want to see the UK back into the EU. That's something that you would imagine would do if he became a leader of the Labour Party. Was he playing a little bit of, you know, political games when he sort of came out with that, knowing that Andy Burnham was also on the record as saying that he wanted to rejoin in his lifetime, but knowing that actually in Makerfield and the surrounding areas that would be quite difficult because of the strength of reform that seems to be in that area, just on the back of the local elections?
Well, it's a very strong Leave voting constituency, and of course, you know, I mean, Andy Burnham would be completely mad to suggest rejoining the EU when he's trying to win the votes of people in Makerfield. But yes, I mean, almost everybody thinks that Wes Streeting was playing a rather interesting game there. He certainly, as well, set himself up as you know, his credentials as a leadership candidate, and you know, it does actually kind of have a striking contrast with Andy Burnham, actually, because you know, you got Andy U-turning all over the place. I mean, he's never had to be pinned down on a position until now, and Wes Streeting is basically saying, well, this is what I stand for, this is what I do.
You're absolutely right. And look, we had Paul Richards on earlier on, that was a former advisor to the Labour Party, and he was very clear, rightly so, that there isn't a leadership contest taking place. So, we're all hypothesising, but we feel as though that there has been one sort of going on behind the scenes for a few weeks now. But let's do what we should all do on a bank holiday weekend and hypothesise about the whole thing. I mean, what happens to the Labour Party now? Let's say that there is a challenge. We don't know how many candidates there would actually be. We know that Andy Burnham and Wes Streeting have both said that yes, that they would throw their hat into the ring. Andy Burnham, simply has been on record to say he wants to change the Labour Party, so that's quite a strong indication. Wes Streeting has actually come out categorically to say yes, he would be a candidate, but we don't know what the outcome would be of Makerfield, which could then mean that if you need a candidate on the left, maybe to Wes Streeting's more central Blairite audience that he courts within the Labour Party, you'd need Angela Rayner to step forward. You'd need maybe Ed Miliband to throw his name into the ring. We keep hearing about this Al Kearns chap that not many people, I think, outside the Labour Party or us Westminster geeks would know about. Yvette Cooper could be someone that sort of steadies the ship, or John Healey, who, if he can get back to the UK without being diverted by Russian planes, he might be sort of, swooping in. Where does the Labour Party actually go? Does Starmer stay? I mean, that is something that I think is actually underbaked at the minute. If the Labour Party still can't get its act together to have a leadership contest, we might still be stuck with Starmer this time next year, won't we?
I mean, almost everything's on the cards, isn't it? But I mean, anybody who says that there's not a leadership contest is just completely kind of keeping their eyes and ears closed. I mean, there may not be official candidates, but there's definitely a leadership contest. This is what this by-election is all about. I mean, look, let's be frank here. Labour MPs are rolling the dice on this by-election. If Andy Burnham wins, then the fact that they've delayed a change for weeks and weeks and left us with a zombie government for weeks will pay off, and we'll have a coronation at the end of it, and Andy Burnham will win and will be made Prime Minister and Labour leader. There will be barely any challenge to him. If Andy Burnham fails there,
and do you think,
just
on that, David, do you think that would really happen within weeks? I mean, would the country be able to stomach somebody literally just sort of, waltzing into Westminster to then see the Prime Minister depart number 10 just for Andy Burnham? Would there not have to be a few months, would Burnham not be given a cabinet role under Keir Starmer's government just to sort of bed in, like a sort of a handover period or something like that?
I don't think. I mean, this government's completely lost its power, its energy, or everything about it. I mean, I'm not sure Labour MPs have got the patience to hang around. To be honest, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Andy Burnham wins middle of June. I wouldn't be surprised if he's Prime Minister before the summer recess. Let's put it like that. I don't think there'll be much hanging around if he wins. But the problem is if he doesn't win, and then we have complete chaos for weeks and probably months. As everybody tries to work out who can run. I think it'll end up being, in that circumstance, Streeting versus Angela Rayner. But, who knows? Who knows?
Well, in order to get Andy Burnham in that leadership running, he obviously has to win Makerfield, as you said. And both Reform and Labour have said that this is a very clear by-election. It is either going to be between Reform or Labour. That's how they're phrasing it, and that's got the Conservatives going, because some senior Conservatives in the week said actually that they shouldn't field a candidate because they don't want to split any potential votes on the right. And even Caroline Lucas on the left, the former leader of the Greens, said that she too wouldn't be fielding a candidate for the Greens because she would rather see Andy Burnham as the MP there and coming in, you can imagine, to lead the country rather than just have another Reform MP. So you've got the two groups there, the Conservatives and the Greens, both saying, let's not field any candidates, let's just have this as a referendum, basically, a binary choice between do you want Andy Burnham as the MP who could go on to lead the Labour Party in the country, or you don't? How do you see it? And, do you think that's the right approach?
Well, I think that's a very dangerous game to play. I think you're doing a disservice to people in Makerfield if you don't stand candidates. I mean, there may be people who just can't abide either Labour or Reform. There's plenty of voters like that, and I think there's a duty to stand candidates against it. I don't buy this argument at all. And let's be honest, Kemi Badenoch detests Reform so much that there's no prospect of a deal. I know Jacob Rees-Mogg is looking at a possible by-election in his old seat because of issues with the current MP. but and hoping reform won't stand against him. But that's not going to happen. That's for the birds as well. So it's and with the Greens, again, there's so much bad blood between Labour and the Greens now. I'm not sure that there's much room for a deal at all.
Well, the Greens have got to put up a candidate, I think, because the last one that they put up, I think, pulled out within a matter of hours.
The problem with both Greens and Reform seems to be the social media history of their chosen candidates. At least the Greens pulled theirs quite quickly with some weird excuse which didn't hold up. But Reform's candidates having a fairly torrid time of it. Looks like.
You're absolutely right. And a couple of policy announcements that came out over the last couple of days. Let's just get a quick view on yours, what your views are about reform. Not taxing or basically making sure that any overtime that you work, but earning under less than £75,000, that any overtime worked shouldn't be taxed. That'll go down with working people, won't it?
I thought Trevor Phillips hit the nail on the head actually on Sky News on this. It was, it's a law of unintended consequences. It sounds like a great idea and one which would encourage people to do overtime, but all you'll do is you'll end up getting people to get most of their earnings on overtime, and it'll distort the market. So people are not paying tax on the basic minimum wage and then earning loads on overtime. I mean, it's just it will go slightly mad, and then we'll have to reverse it. That's my view.
And finally, just whilst I've got you, I think Labour today sort of saying that parents on benefits could be paid to let teenagers be apprentices. So this is, Alan Milburn, who has been a social... I was going to call him a social media star there. He's not a particular me. Maybe he might be. He might be huge on social media for all I know. But a social mobility star is the word I'm looking for, where he's absolutely right to say that at the minute, we're spending, or he says for every £25 that we spend keeping young people on benefits, we spend only £1 helping them get back into work through employment support. So the idea that actually you can be paying people on benefits more, parents on benefits, to help their kids go and get an apprenticeship and go and do something with their life. Is this something that's got legs in it? Is this something that will be welcomed, or is this just going to cost too much money? If you don't reform welfare on the other end, then you can't invest that money to help young people get those apprenticeships?
I mean, he's not wrong. I mean, he's identified the problem. I can't help but feel that giving parents a bit of money to send their teenagers out to do an apprenticeship is a bit of a gimmick. I mean, I just wonder if this is dodging looking at the welfare and tax policy, and just why don't we just use that welfare money simply to pay them to do an apprenticeship instead of using it to keep them at home? It's just as simple as that. I mean, I admit he's obviously looked at the problem in much greater detail than I have, but the trouble is with dealing with these issues, we've been plagued by gimmicks over the years when really the kind of fundamental reform needs to take place that is often avoided.
You're absolutely right, David, and it's going to be a busy week ahead. I think politicians come back tomorrow, do they, after the bank holiday weekend? Is there anything that we should be looking out for from the political parties in this week?
I think we still have a bit of a recess this week, but it's all by-election and leadership speculation and what you think Andy Burnham's going to do next. I think my colleagues who are out there in Makerfield are all kind of in a race to get him to do another U-turn. So I've lost count actually when he's done, but nobody seems to care because most people seem to think he's a good guy. So.
Great stuff. Well, that's David Maddox. Thank you so much for joining me on this Bank Holiday Monday. Go and enjoy whatever it is that you might be having on tonight, whether it's a nice shandy, a beer shandy, or a white wine spritzer, or a soft drink, just to see out what has been a scorcher of a Bank Holiday Monday. That was David Maddox there, political editor of The Independent, taking us through all the day's headlines and looking at the week ahead. Still to come, all of your texts and calls and messages. We'll be getting through them all, I promise you. Thank you for bearing with us and waiting, but we're going to be spending all the time in the final hour with you lovely listeners. This is Charlie Rowley. It is the Evening Exchange. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening and welcome back to the Evening Exchange with me, Charlie Rowley, sitting in for Peter Cardwell. We'll be getting through all your calls and messages, starting with another one from Glyn, who's been back in touch. She says, "Hi, Charlie. Apologies for the second message. Never apologise. Send as many as you like. We will read them all out, I promise you, by the end of the show. But I have to say, great to hear the fab Georgiana on the airwaves again. Well, she is, I think, a regular caller. Certainly when I've been sitting in this hot seat, we've spoken a couple of times, and she speaks the absolute truth to power. Talk, just a quick note to say, you are doing a sterling job and great show, Charlie. That was to everybody in the studio, my fantastic team outside that keep the show on the road. They say thank you back to their PS. My mum, who's 83, thinks you are a dreamboat. Well, mum, hello. Happy Bank Holiday Monday. Keep up the great hard work. That's from Steve, I think, from Rainhill. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for your company this evening. If judges are persuaded, this is from Zarina, I think, if I pronounced that right. If judges are persuaded to lower the threshold for imprisonment, especially for children who have committed serious crimes, hit the parents severely in their pockets. Parental responsibility has been on the decline for far too long. I could not agree with you more. I think a lot of people would agree with that. Good evening, Charlie. Great show. Thank you very much. It makes me physically sick that boys who film themselves raping a teenage girl at knife point don't go to jail, but people who are being sent to jail for stupid posts online. Shows how backwards our society is and is a sad reflection on 2026 Britain. Ashton Hancock, you are on the money. How is it that police are able to police our tweets, not the streets, and lock up some of the most vile characters that we have in the country? And this was all in relation to one of the stories that's gripped the nation over the last week, where a judge, Nicholas Rowland, has failed to sentence 3 teenage boys for a cruel, sadistic, malicious, horrific rape of teenage girls. He cited that they just displayed good behaviour during the trial and they had a low IQ. Oh, there you go then. That's enough to avoid jail time. Not on my watch, I don't believe. There's just one more I'm just going to read out here. This is from someone who would like to remain anonymous, which I think is pertinent just to that conversation we were having. And of course you can remain anonymous, but I think it's important to get your story out here, because you said last year I was sexually assaulted. My social worker reported this to the police, and I'm also classed as a vulnerable adult. There was delay after delay. After 6 months, and still not having had a formal interview, I couldn't cope anymore. My mental health, where I already had PTSD, was crumbling, so I just dropped the case. The anxiety was just too much. I thought it was relevant to the discussion you've been having tonight. Well, thank you very much for that. You will remain anonymous, but I think it's really important that, people who have got experiences, who want to share them, are able to share them. This is the home of common sense, this is the home of free speech, but being able to take part in this conversation and just highlight the problems that we have in our system, we thank you for that. That's really appreciated. Thank you so much for that this afternoon, or this evening, I should say, on this Bank Holiday Monday. Right, we're going to take a couple of calls now. I think we're going to start with Karen in Bournemouth.
Hi, Charlie.
Hi, Karen. How are you?
I'm exceedingly good. The sun is out, the sky is blue. I'm a happy girl.
Well, there you are. But you've called in tonight, so what's grinding your gears, Karen? What's got you going?
Well, I'm utterly disgusted at the so appalling feelings of Keir Starmer. He was chief prosecutor and made it harder to prosecute rape.
Mm.
He wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't the by-election up in Makerfield. Because what he'll do is, if Herman changes it, he'll say that, Andy Burnham didn't do anything about it, whereas he did. And the Labour Party have actively, and still are actively, covering up grooming gangs, rape, all over the place. There's not been a single prosecution of any of the authorities that were involved in these, like the policeman who raped the girl after she'd escaped the grooming gangs.
Mm. Well,
or the social worker that went to the wedding of a grooming gang and some poor girl. So he's talking out of his backside. satisfied because he could not care less.
Well, I think you're onto something there, Karen, because, there seems to be... The problem with all politics and politicians is that they can say one thing but do something completely different, or they don't match the actions with the words in which that they are speaking. So when you have a government that says it's going to go for growth, that was what the government said that they were going to do. That was the number one word in their manifesto. It's something that they said time and time again when they were taking part in media interviews during that election campaign. We've not seen any growth at all. When they said they're going to smash the gangs or stop the votes, as it was under the Conservatives, and we see record number of people coming into this country, people get obviously very upset by that, as they rightly should be. They're up in, arms up in anger when they don't have the delivery of what the government say that they're going to do. And so when it comes to things like a grooming gang scandal, or protecting women and girls from violence in this country, if governments say that that is their number one objective, but then you see cases like this, whether it's a grooming gang scandal within our country, where they're not prosecuted, where this government didn't want to even have a national inquiry, which is beggars belief, because I thought that was one of those easiest decisions any government could ever make. It smacks in the face of what people want, doesn't it?
Well, the thing is, basically, instead of making new laws every 5 minutes, they need to simplify the ones they've got. And I would seriously look at this judge and check his social media, because he seems to think it's fine to let paedophiles off.
Well, the judge, in this case, yes, he has had a form of only giving, I think, a 3-month, allowing someone to serve 3 months out of a 3-year prison sentence, I think, for knocking over a cyclist in his BMW when the perpetrator in that case was high on marijuana, and I think letting someone else off who did have, yes, pornographic images of a serious nature on their phone. Karen, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your call. Let's go to Grace in London.
Thanks.
Hi, Grace.
Hi.
Happy Bank Holiday Monday.
And to you, I'm going to be really hated by people for saying this, but I noticed that, I think it was Farage, Rupert Lowe and Ben Habib were referred to as the three wise men earlier. And I thought that was a bit ironic because, for one thing, the text from which that phrase derives doesn't actually say how many wise men there were. There were magi, and they had 3 gifts, but we don't know how many of them there were. But obviously, that comes from the historical account of Jesus' birth. And those individuals, those magi, they were migrants. They were literally moving from one place to another place to seek Jesus, traveling across countries. And I kind of feel that one of the things about these politicians is that it's not necessarily super wise to, this is the bit that I think is going to be controversial, it's not necessarily super wise to blame all our problems on migrants as much as some people want to do. I completely get that there are people coming in who don't know the right to come in, and some of them behave terribly. I'm not disagreeing with that, but I feel that there's a little bit too much emphasis on migration and the presumption that stopping it would resolve a lot of things. And I think there could be more wisdom in looking at our country's problems in the round a bit more, and thinking a little bit more widely about changing demographics and other things that are having an impact on the country. I think there's a bit too much emphasis from those 3 politicians on migration.
No, I think you're probably not wrong there, but the pushback to that, I think people would say, is that for too long, if anybody feels as though that they've talked about immigration in a way in which they feel people that do come into this country, even legally, and even if they come to work, but haven't integrated or don't speak the language, for too long, people that have raised concerns about that have been deemed either racist or far right, and therefore it's driven the conversation down and to the dark web, or where you can't talk about it because nobody wants to be accused of being racist or far right. But now what we are seeing, even if it is, a handful of cases, but that's a handful too many in some people's eyes, where people come to the country illegally, they get put up in a hotel, they get the health checks, whether it's through doctors and dentistry, whether they get sort of days out by the council, but then they go on to commit a crime, maybe of a serious sexual nature, and yet then we can't deport them. That just makes people go crazy, and you can understand that, can't you?
Oh, completely. I'm not disagreeing that that's a complete travesty. I'm not disagreeing that people shouldn't get various freebies that British people who are taxpayers don't get. I'm not disagreeing with any of those things. I just think that if we were to look at all of the numbers regarding the wealth of the country and criminals all across the country and things like that, we might find that migration isn't quite as much to blame as some of the rhetoric might suggest. And I think that we have quite a kind of instinctive, primal impulse to feel that we're inherently good people and the evil just comes from people who are different, who come from outside. But that's actually a bit of a fallacy and antithetical to the teachings of Jesus himself, whose teachings and values have shaped our country really positively. So I think we want people to kind of integrate to those values as much as possible, but not necessarily just pin all the blame of everything for people who come from elsewhere, because there are lots of things that have changed over the last century which have contributed to some of the problems we talk about. It's, greedy bosses of companies that are messing up our water systems and changing proportions of workers to people who have reached pension age. That's not to blame those people. Obviously, it's marvellous that people are living longer, but lots of things have changed, and we should consider those things as well as migration when we're thinking about how to make the country great for everyone.
Grace, you talked about the three wise men at the start. I think you are one wise woman there. I hope you're having a wonderful bank holiday Monday. Thank you so much for your call. We're going to go to a break in a second, but before you do, I may as well just address the elephant in the room because I'm a little bit croaky, but I put that down to many hours in this building, including breakfast with whether it's Jeremy Kyle, Mark Dolan, or Ian Collins, as it was this morning. It might also have something to do with the fact that if you were listening to the last show that I did on Friday, I'm a huge Arsenal supporter who's gone on to win the league, and I might have been cheering a bit too much, but only cheering, I have to say. So if you are a football fan, you've now got the chance to win an excellent and very exciting competition when it comes to the World Cup. I've got to read this out to you where you can get involved, because the FIFA World Cup 2026 is almost here, and thanks to Adidas, the tournament's official match ball supplier, our friends at talkSPORT are giving you the chance to be there. Adidas is sending you and a friend to Dallas to see England versus Croatia live on June 17, with return flights, accommodation, spending money, tickets, and your very own Adidas official match ball Trionda. Be at England's first game in the FIFA World Cup at one of the world's best stadiums. Ready to get that winning feeling? Here's how to enter.
Get ready for that winning feeling. For your chance to win, head to talksportwin.com or text TALK to 83338. Texts and online entries cost £2.50 plus your standard network rate. Or call 0343 418 7260. Lines close 1st of June 2026 at 4 p.m. That's when you'll need to answer your phone if it rings. 18 plus UK residents only. This is a network promotion. See full terms and conditions at talksport.com/win. So for your chance to win, text TALK to 83338 now. Full T's and C's at win.talk.tv.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, best of luck with that competition that you heard before the break. And we were just talking about it here in the studio, where the ball technology in this World Cup seems to be better than ever. It needs to be charged. electronically, I would have thought, a battery-powered ball, in order to be tracked throughout the game, which is fantastic. Isn't this technology of absolute brilliance? Although it might be going a bit too far. I mean, we've had too much technology in football, I think, over the last year. VAR, of many people, will be pulling their hair out over some of the decisions that have been made this year. But let's see how this goes. I think it tracks, obviously, how much distance and how many touches of the ball who the players, I'm assuming. Goal line technology. Who knows? I'm not a very tech person, but I am a football person, and that's a very good competition that you can win if you enter. Good luck to you all. Now, we had international security expert earlier on, Henry Bolton, talking about all things Russia and its relationship with the UK and the threats that Russia poses to the UK. I'm delighted to be speaking in just a minute's time to Matt Belinsky, US attorney and podcast host, who is going to be talking now, I'm told, about the latest situation between the US and Iran. Good evening, Matt.
Good evening.
Is it evening where you are? Are you in the UK, or are you beaming into us? States?
Yeah, I'm in Los Angeles. It's bright middle of the day out here, but you know, I'm on your territory, so nighttime for our purposes.
Well, thank you very much. We've had an absolute scorcher of a day here. I think it reached over 30 degrees.
I'd love
34. 34 record highs.
These things in Celsius, 30 degrees for us would be frigid and frosty. So we love hearing that 30 degrees. Where you guys are, you know, means everybody's out on the roof decks and tanning and frolicking in the park. So great to hear.
Well, we've got it for another week to come, so I'll be looking forward to a lot of that. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, because obviously the latest in the US conflict with Iran is a global story. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed for some time now. That impacts on everybody's energy bills. What's the latest as you see it? Is there going to be a deal brokered between Trump and Iran? We've been told this before. Is it actually going to happen? What's your take on it all?
It seems a little more real than it has, at least in weeks. But the problem is, and why you can't, it's very difficult to separate the wheat from the chaff and determine what's actually an indicator that a deal is imminent, is, you know, and both sides are to a certain extent guilty of this, but the Iranian side, without a doubt, will leak some communications that whatever their latest proposal has been agreed to. So then when that proposal, which is unacceptable to the Americans, Donald Trump, is then rejected, they can claim that Trump and the Americans are the ones who don't do a deal and are unwilling to negotiate. It does seem at this point, there's more indicators that the Iranians realize the blockade's not stopping anytime soon, and that the domestic pressure, essentially, the Iranians were relying on domestic pressure around Donald Trump to that he would cave on the blockade because energy prices and gas prices are too high. There were some elections last week in the U.S., mostly primaries, but there was a real affirmation of the candidates that Donald Trump was supporting. And that's a bit of an indicator that, you know, maybe they made it all the way to November with the midterm elections, that there would be some negative repercussions to Donald Trump and his coalition. But as of right now, the domestic consequences to what Donald Trump is doing are not significant enough to move him off his negotiating position. And the Iranians might just take that as an indicator that, listen, this is the best deal that we're going to get. And if not, we're going to have to deal with this blockade for months longer, and our economy just can't sustain it.
I mean, there's been a ceasefire that's taken place over many days. Has that not just allowed Iran, behind the scenes, we know what kind of regime they are, to maybe ramp up their production of drones that seem to have been wiped out? Have they been garnering more equipment with a renewed commitment to dragging this out, this conflict, even longer than what certainly the president would like, and obviously hard-working Brits here whose energy bills are going up because of it, and no doubt Americans that want to see the US not involved in an international conflict?
Fair enough. Although drone production, drones can't be produced that quickly, and particularly with some of the degradation and capacity that the Iranians have experienced overall. And once again, the Americans were able to bomb a lot of their facilities before the ceasefire. And you can create a lot of drones, but that doesn't necessarily break the blockade. And great, you can go produce another 3,500 drones, but if you've got the might of the American Navy and all these warships imposing a blockade on you, what does that really do for you is the question. So, and there's only some, you know, once again, with the blockade, things can't come out, things also cannot come in, to the extent that Iran is reliant on international resources and or weapons, those can't get into Iran. So whatever they're doing in terms of increasing capacity, reconstituting, that's limited as well. So I think there was a question, and that was one of the main issues here, is how effective is a blockade and what is Iran's ability to withstand one? And we're getting some indicators that they've reached their end of the rope and being able to withstand a blockade.
Just more broadly on the conflict as a whole, I mean, I was very clear, for what it's worth, that, look, I think the UK should have been more supportive with our US allies. I do think, there is a special relationship, an enduring one, where actually, where the US has the military might and has funded so much in terms of NATO and military protections for here in the UK and Europe, that the very least we could have done was to say yes to the US, who wanted to use our air bases to go on and take out which is a tyrannical regime that turns its guns on its own people, that funds the proxies like the Hamases, the Houthis, the Hezbollahs. Now, our Prime Minister said this wasn't our war, he didn't want to get involved, and the majority of the British public backed him, and still make that, I think that is the view still held today. That was the view, I think, at the start of the conflict in the US. I'd say majority of people were not keen on the US getting involved in another international war. But now that it's happening, now that if it is, as I think you're indicating, it's sort of, Iran have run out of road to a degree, will this be therefore a success for President Trump in the run-up to the midterms that you might be having out there? What is the public mood from America like towards, A, the UK for not helping, but also just the conflict more broadly?
Sure. I don't think the UK's role in this is very conscious for a lot of Americans, but there's definitely one segment that, yes, absolutely believes that the European countries, really all the way back to, since the inception of NATO, really have kind of free road off American military might. And listen, there's some credibility to that belief, and that the European countries that have not had to spend much of their, sometimes you'll see memes, hey, you get to have free healthcare out in Europe because we spend our money on a very capable military that will protect you if push comes to shove. However, I can't say that that's something that's really a widespread conscious belief amongst Americans. So, I think it's kind of a more secondary concern. In terms of the mood around the conflict in general, we have a saying out here in America around, basketball, that it's a make or miss league, that pretty much a shot is good if it goes in and a shot is bad if it does not go in. I'm sure there's a similar concept in football for you guys. And so I think that really is how Americans are approaching this war. If it ends relatively quickly and with terms that are favorable to America, good idea. If it doesn't, bad idea, right? With the Iraq War, for instance, had we just toppled Saddam Hussein, implemented a friendly government and got out of there in 9 to 15 months, we would have said, oh, that was a great idea in retrospect. So this is going to be judged by, can Trump wrap this up relatively soon? I think you're going to start really losing a lot of tolerance in the next month or so. Or maybe I've said that before. So if there's not active military actions, maybe American public has more tolerance for it. But if some of the terms that have been floated out over the past 24 hours reflect the final deal here, and it looks like they might, particularly some of the indications from the Saudi Arabians, if Iran has to materially degrade or withhold their nuclear program, and the Strait of Hormuz is opened back up, and some of those other countries are still on track to enter into the Abraham Accords, which seems like it's a kind of third prong to the deal that's being worked out. If that all turns out to be true, I think Donald Trump's going to come out of here looking very good, and that will to a certain extent also be dependent on gas prices dropping over the next few months after a ceasefire. If that happens, this is a big win for Donald Trump. If it keeps on being extended and Americans see the gas prices they're seeing now well into the fall, and Iran's able to maintain some control over the Strait of Hormuz and is able to maintain their nuclear program, then a lot of people are going to say this was Trump's folly. So it's a make or miss league. We don't know if the shot has gone in yet, so we can't tell if it was a good idea.
Finally, I think look, Donald Trump is a unique character, I think, if I can politely say that. I think people would agree with that. But what is so unique about him is his ability to, for example, maybe underestimate the response of Iran that he might have overlooked and just thought, look, we can get this wrapped up within a matter of days, use our military might, unleash fire and fury, the kinds of things that he said, and we'll get this done. but yet he seems to have come back from China, a rival in terms of an economic sense, but been able to woo the Chinese, as it were. He's been able, seemingly to get them to talk to or to have a role in standing Iran down. So Iran, Russia, China, Venezuela, for example, forming an alliance on one side of the global divide versus the West. Now, you wouldn't have thought that it should have been the other way around, shouldn't it? I mean, Donald Trump should have been able to take Iran down just like that, and it should have been a much more difficult set of cards that he had to play in China.
Potentially, yes. I think that there is a military aspect that Trump probably underestimated the difficulty of, but similarly, the guy thinks through, and I think he's underestimated here in thinking through multiple facets of a deal. And to a certain extent, he might have been more cavalier about the initial military activities because he knew, okay, worst case scenario, I can just go stick a bunch of warships outside their country in the Gulf and implement a blockade, which is what he did. So it might have, I think the backup plans kind of informed how Trump proceeded here. And with China, there's a concept called escalatory dominance. And right now, and it's something that Donald Trump always relies on, he has escalatory dominance because China doesn't want to get involved in the war. China just wants to sit out of their hair, right? So Donald Trump has shown we're willing to attack this country, kill the first 100 people in line for its 100 of its leaders and institute a big blockade, and I'm willing to do that. China, are you willing to go blow for blow with me in America on that? Or do you want to get militarily involved here? Or would you rather help me cut a deal here so everyone can go back to business? And I think he's utilized that approach to a lot of benefit with his dealings with the Chinese.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Matt Blitzky. We have to leave it there. Thank you so much, US Attorney and podcast host. Hope to come and see you in LA soon. You never know. Going to a quick break now. Afterwards, we'll have all your calls and texts. This is the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good evening. This is Charlie Rowley in for Peter Cardwell on Talk, the home of common sense. We're going straight to your calls now for the last 5 minutes. Bob in Clacton-on-Sea, Essex. Bob, take it away.
Hi, Charlie.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you, matey.
What would you like?
I'm good. Yeah, it's just a quickie, right? I'm just a bit bewildered, right, at the way the Labour Party, right, they've got a massive majority of the Commons, okay? They've got a full cabinet, yet they are breaking their necks to try and get somebody elected who's not even a member of Parliament. Doesn't this demonstrate their lack of talent on their front bench?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, look, they've got over 400 MPs. And you never know, one of them might still take over from the Prime Minister, should there be a leadership election. There isn't currently one there, but as David Maddox from The Independent was saying earlier on, it's all that we've all been talking about, so it's very likely that will happen. But you're right, what does it say about the state of politics in general when MPs don't seem to be having the backing of the public to actually do the job?
Well, that's right. And as you just pointed out, right, obviously, I live in Clacton-on-Sea area. Nigel Farage is my MP. And I've met him a couple of times, and I find him a thoroughly decent guy. But I think what's going to happen with the Labour Party is, if it hasn't happened already, is that they have totally run out of steam, run out of ideas. They have, and everything they're coming up with is just totally contrary to what the public needs at the moment. I don't think the Labour Party have got many more miles on the clock. Also, the Tories have not yet been forgiven for what happened under their watch. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. But
I think you're absolutely. I think you're absolutely right, Bob. There's a long way to go for the Tories before they want to come back. Although Kemi does seem to be turning things around, but whether that's just her personal polling rather than the party, we don't have too long to go until the next general election. A few years to go. Let's see. Thank you so much, Bob. Let's go to Steve in Scunthorpe.
Hello.
Hi, Steve.
Just a quick one. Not what I called in about, but what you was talking about was. I'm trying to think now about people getting money for going to apprenticeships and that. So, at 16. So, if you giving somebody else money.
So I think, sorry, Steve, I think the line is a bit dodgy, but I think what you were talking about there is just the idea that the government will be paying families who are on benefits to enable their kids to basically go on and take up an apprenticeship. Is it a good use of taxpayers' money? We're spending more money on welfare than ever before. Should people not just go up and get a job anyway? People should be wanting to earn and do an apprenticeship anyway, rather than spend a life on benefits. Thank you, Steve. We might just have to leave it there. We've got Peter Barnes here.
Hello, Charlie.
Hello.
How are you doing? This is very weird, isn't it? We've been left in without anybody in charge.
We've only got a minute.
Yes.
You're doing the next show.
I am indeed. I'm in for Petri, and we're covering everything from Makerfield. We're going through Ukraine. We've got Thorin Govin is coming in to talk about the heat wave, because I don't know about you, but I'm just a sweaty puddle on the floor. I was not built for hot weather. I can't stand it. From the north of England, I didn't realise you could take a jumper off till I was about 22. It's crazy. But yeah, so we've got a full-packed show.